Chapter 560. Outside, the scorching sun was scorching. The unobstructed sunlight made people afraid that if they were to bathe in that scorching light, they would melt from the heat. However, little Hong Yang, who was in the middle of the hall, looked at the deranged Xiao Minglan and her back shivered for no reason. A layer of coldness formed in her heart. She placed her hand on Xiao Minglan's hand and said softly, "Your Highness, you are drunk. Can I help you to rest?" Xiao Minglan laughed even more hysterically. He used his hazy, drunken eyes to sweep across Little Red Smoke and the entire world. "I'm drunk." He shook his head. "No, I'm not the one who's drunk. It's all of you. That person has crawled back from hell. I'm finished. The entire Great You is finished. Ha 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 ha. Where's the wine? Guards. My wine." Outside the hall, his personal guard said timidly, "Your Highness, you can't drink anymore." Xiao Minglan's eyes widened. He rushed out of little Hong Yang's arms with disheveled hair. He staggered barefooted and shouted angrily, "Who dares to disobey my orders? I'll sentence you to death. Wine, I want wine, more wine." Facing the crazy Xiao Minglan, the personal guard could only bow his head helplessly. Yes. He went to get the wine. The hall returned to silence. Xiao Minglan sat on the soft couch, exhausted. He stared at the dazzling light outside the hall, causing little Hong Yang to panic. After a long, long time, he laughed again, accompanied by 2 streams of hot tears. It was as if all the strength in his body had been exhausted, and he could only use his throat to slowly squeeze out a little sound. Elder sister, if you didn't think yourself clever, how would we have fallen to such a state where we are worse than pigs and dogs?" Retribution, Xiao Minglan's personal guard returned amidst his tears. Looking at the empty hands of the guard, Xiao Minglan said coldly, "Where's my wine?" The personal guard said anxiously, "Your Highness, Prince Xiaoho from the Nanping residence is outside the residence." Xiao Minglan's eyelids twitched. "Didn't I say that I won't see anyone? Even if the emperor comes, I won't see anyone. Chase him away." The personal guard fell to his knees. "Your subordinate is useless. I couldn't chase him away." Prince Xiaoho said that his life is hanging by a thread. "He must see your Highness today. Otherwise, he will break in. He's going to die too." Xiao Minglan mumbled, "But I'm going to die too. I can't even save myself, how can I save him?" As soon as he finished speaking, he heard the sound of a large bell from outside the vermilion gate of the prince's mansion. It was so loud that even the deaf could hear it. Juicy introduced himself on behalf of Xiaoho Qing. "Prince Nanping's mansion greets His Highness Prince Ku." 2 slender and indifferent figures descended from the sky under the encirclement of swords and sabers of hundreds of Xiao Minglan's guards. Then, they calmly walked towards Xiao Minglan's main hall. Xiao Minglan stood up and looked at Xiaoho Qing, who was walking towards her. It hadn't been long since the last time they played mahjong together, but it felt like years had passed. Xiaoho Qing's face was obviously paler than before. There was no trace of blood in his face. He himself was not any better. He was dead drunk and living a life worse than death. Xiao Minglan laughed foolishly. He waved at Xiaoho Qing and said, "Prince Xiaoho, come, come. I heard that you're going to die too. Just nice, accompany me. We'll have another companion on our way to the netherworld." These words were inauspicious. Juicy supported Xiaoho Qing and frowned. Xiaoho Qing smiled faintly, "Sure. If I can have such an interesting person like Prince Ku with me to the netherworld, death will be interesting. Maybe I can play mahjong with you again when I queue for Meng Po's soup on the Bridge of Helplessness. It won't be lonely." Chapter 561. Ha 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 ha, I told you that you are a wonderful person. Xiao Minglan stretched out his hand, half laughing and half crying. There were still traces of tears on his face. He said with drunken eyes, "Since you are not afraid of death, why are you still looking for me?" Xiaoho Qing raised his hand, indicating for Ju Sai to help him to sit opposite Xiao Minglan. He coughed a few times and laughed softly. "Xiaoho Qing is indeed not afraid of death, but I am afraid of one thing." Xiao Minglan raised his eyebrows. The bright light behind his back made Xiaoho Qing's face look exceptionally resolute. "That is going to the netherworld but not knowing why I died, going to hell but not knowing who stabbed me. Even if I die, Xiahou Qing will not be able to rest in peace. Your Highness the Prince is a very emotional person. Are you willing to do this? Xiao Minglan looked at empty space in confusion. Even if I am not willing, what can I do? We can't win, no one can win. Xiahou Qing's eyebrows twitched. He sensed that Ju Sai obviously knew something. He stood up and said, "How would I know if I haven't tried? Your Highness, please send everyone away." Xiao Minglan raised his head to look at him. He was stunned for a moment before he waved his hand and ordered everyone in the hall to leave. Ju Sai was still not at ease and personally closed all the doors and windows. Xiao Minglan frowned. "What do you want to tell me?" Xiahou Qing did not say a word. He only opened his collar silently and pulled off the fake skin covering his neck, revealing the glaring blood red inside. When he saw the blood-red shape, Xiao Minglan's pupils shrank and he almost fell off the soft couch. His face was pale as he shouted, "You, where did you get this poison from? I have been suffering from this poison since I was 10 years old. After that, it would take away a sense from me every once in a while. Until now, my life is at stake. Since I entered the capital, I have been secretly investigating. I have suspected countless people, including Your Highness the Prince." At this point, Xiahou Qing had no need to hide anymore. He went straight to the point. "Until the princess was killed on the street, I then knew that you and I were birds in the same cage. Over the years, there have been many questions that have been bothering me. Perhaps only the Grand Prince can give me some pointers." Xiao Minglan's lips were trembling and her eyes were in a mess. She turned around and asked, "How can you be so sure that I know something? Maybe I don't know anything. You've got the wrong person." Xiahou Qing smiled faintly, straightened his collar, and sat back down. He said in a low voice, "Your Highness' reaction and answer just now, isn't it? The plum blossom kiss was the plum blossom kiss that was closely related to Empress Ju. There are not many people in the capital who still know about this strange poison and what happened 25 years ago. Among the few who do, the prince is the one I trust the most. The Qinwang might not be afraid of death, but what about Rui Junju? She was 15 years old, in the prime of her life. She hadn't even had the chance to experience the beauty of the world before she was killed. Was she willing to accept this? Could it be that the Grand Prince is willing to let the young commandery princess die with grievances? Hearing Rui's name, Xiao Minglan clenched her fist and bit down hard on the back of her hand. Xiahou Qing lowered his voice and said word by word, "Now that the young commandery princess is dead, if we can't catch the culprit, will the next one to die be your only sister from the same mother, Princess Royal Xiao Mingxue?" Xiao Minglan's entire body shook. She felt as if she had fallen into a boundless whirlpool and was unable to extricate herself. The red mole under her eyes looked as if it was bleeding. She bit her fist until it was broken and her mouth was full of blood. She closed her eyes and exhaled deeply. Her throat was filled with gravel. When Empress Ju died, I was only 6 years old. Chapter 562. Xia Hu Shizi is resourceful and should know about us siblings' background. Our birth mother is a lowly palace maid who was carefully selected by Empress Ju to be sent to Imperial Father's dragon bed after being unable to conceive for many years and being criticized by the court officials. She was a shield to block the mouths of the court officials, a prop, and an object that was not taken seriously at all. Xiao Minglan closed her eyes. Her voice was very tired and a thick sneer escaped from her lips. However, this object's belly was very strong and not long after, she became pregnant with my elder sister. Empress Ju immediately sent an imperial physician to diagnose and found out that it was a girl. Only then did she spare my mother's life. In the years that followed, my mother and my elder sister carefully made a living under her. To be honest, Empress Ju treated my mother very well. She gave my mother silk and satin, wealth, splendor, and did not treat my mother unfairly. She even gave her honor and preferential treatment that far exceeded that of a concubine, causing countless people to be jealous. However, no one knew that every evening when my mother went to the Phoenix Algae Palace to pay her respects, there would be a bowl of contraceptive pills silently placed in front of my mother, waiting to be swallowed mouthful by mouthful. 10 years passed like this. Imperial Father seemed to have completely forgotten about my mother, and only then did he give my mother a chance to catch her breath. Unexpectedly, by chance, Imperial Father looked at my elder sister who was gradually growing up to be slender and elegant, and thought of my mother again. Because of this, behind Empress Ju's back, my mother became pregnant with me. My mother was extremely scared. She knew that if Empress Ju knew about this news, she would definitely be furious. In order to protect my life and let me come to this world safely, she made the boldest decision in her life, which was to conceal the news of her pregnancy and claim that she was ill. In order to prevent her figure from being seen by others, she only dared to eat very little every day. Even when she vomited during pregnancy, she only dared to do it quietly in the dead of night and did not dare to make a sound. Those 10 years of cautiousness took effect. Empress Ju did not expect my mother to have such courage and dare to disobey her. It wasn't until 8 months later, when my mother couldn't hide herself any longer, that this matter was exposed. But at that time, I had already taken shape and could not be removed. In addition, Fu Huang had a son at a later age, so he was very happy. He ordered the imperial physicians to take good care of him and not let anything happen to him. Unexpectedly, Empress Ju, who frightened her mother and sister, did not flare up. Instead, she sent palace maids, tonics, medicinal herbs, silk and satin, gold, jade and jewelry to her mother. She even personally visited her mother every day and gently comforted her. Even the harshest imperial censor would not be able to find any fault with it. Until the night I was born, my mother suddenly died. Xiao Minglan opened her eyes and sneered at Xiahou Qing. She raised her eyebrows and said, "Make a guess. How did she die?" Xiahou Qing's face was calm, and his voice was as light as smoke, like an invisible sigh. "Difficult labor." Xiao Minglan laughed heartily. "Ha ha ha, Your Highness guessed correctly. It was a difficult birth. How could such an illustrious empress, who was like a phoenix descending from the heavens, whose appearance and virtue were impeccable, be caught by others?" Everyone in the imperial physicians said that my mother died from a difficult birth. She worked hard and made great contributions. It was lamentable and lamentable. Only the two of us know that my mother's death was for me to live. Without my birth mother, my 12-year-old sister raised me single-handedly. In order to show that woman that we were obedient and submissive, we had to wag our tails at her feet from time to time like ingrates, begging her to turn a blind eye and give us a way out. Then, the day finally arrived, the day of revenge. Chapter 563. Xiahou Qing seemed to have caught on to something. He paused and said, "I have heard that the eldest princess was treated with great respect by His Majesty and was given the title of Protector Eldest Princess. You have made great contributions to His Majesty's ascension to the throne." Xiao Minglan let out a long breath and said in a low voice, "Yes, we were involved in the palace coup 25 years ago. I recognize the plum blossom kiss on your neck because 25 years ago, my imperial father died from this poison and the person who poisoned him was Empress Ju. At that time, imperial father was old and my eldest brother, who was the crown prince, was in his prime. How could an old wolf be willing to submit to someone else?" Although no one in the palace dared to say anything, I could clearly feel that the atmosphere in the palace had changed. Everyone was very nervous, like a string of taut strings. It made people panic, as if something big was going to happen at any time. Because the crown prince was appointed, the relationship between imperial father and Empress Ju gradually drifted apart. Empress Ju also received more and more accusations from the court. At this critical moment, imperial father suddenly fell ill. At that time, I was not even 6 years old and was a wild dog without a mother. I spent my days at Empress Ju's feet wagging my tail and begging for pity. No one took me seriously. Thus, after an imperial physician examined me, I used my small body to sneak into imperial father's bedroom. I saw the half-opened blood-red plum blossom on the side of his neck. There was no one else in the bedroom. Only imperial father was lying on the bed with his limbs stiff like a wooden puppet. At that time, he could not even speak. When he saw me, he could only open his eyes wide and look at me with the urgency of a dying fish. He gasped for breath from his throat. At that time, I was very scared. I did not know what had happened. I was so scared that tears flowed down my face. I only wanted to run away from this incomprehensible situation. But when I turned around, I suddenly realized that Father Emperor was staring at me, and then looking in a certain direction. His throat kept making short noises, and his eyes were full of urgency and a pleading that I had never seen before. It was as if I was his last straw to save his life. I realized that my father wanted me to take something out and entrust it to me. I hesitated for a while and walked back. I followed my father's gaze and found a hidden compartment behind his bookshelf. I found a hard object wrapped in a yellow cloth. Trembling, I ran back to my father's bed. I watched as his mouth opened and closed soundlessly. He struggled to say the word four, which meant fourth brother. Then, he told me to leave quickly. I was scared out of my wits for half an incense stick's worth of time. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a carriage being prepared outside the door. My entire body quivered, and I hurriedly brought the bag of metal out of the dog hole in the wall, bringing it to my older sister. After that, it passed through my sister's hands and ended up in the hands of my fourth brother, the sage. You know what happened after that. Xiao Minglan's expression was blank as she murmured, I thought that after Empress Ju's death, our great enmity would be avenged, and the coffin would be closed. I didn't expect that the vengeful spirit would come back full of resentment and find those who had betrayed her. She would take revenge one by one, and no one would be able to escape. Now that fourth brother is in a coma, the scene from that year has reappeared. Great Yu is finished this time, Xiahou Qing said, I don't believe in ghosts and gods. If there really was a vengeful spirit causing mischief, then the world would be filled with vengeful spirits. Your deceased mother would find Empress Ju herself to take revenge, and there would be no need for the prince to do anything. Other than Empress Ju, could there be other possibilities? Could it be that little Empress Ju still has some trusted subordinates who survived the fire and planned all of this? Xiao Minglan's expression was extremely tired. She shook her head and said, Brother Emperor was an extremely cautious person. When he ascended the throne, he cleaned up all of Empress Ju's remaining evil. Those who died in the fire were also counted and screened before being buried together. I really can't think of any other possibility. Could it be? Xiao Minglan suddenly thought of something. She frowned and inexplicably said, That's impossible. Then, she stopped abruptly. Chapter 564. Xiahou Qing heard the strangeness in Xiao Minglan's words and muttered, If Prince has any ideas, feel free to say them. Xiao Minglan stood up and paced back and forth in the spacious hall. Suddenly, she asked strangely, Does heir apparent know the origin of Ning family's girl's mother and the title of Junju? Xiahou Qing said, I have heard a little about it. On Empress Ju's 40th birthday, she met Junju Hixin by chance. She was as beautiful as snow and her 8 characters were extremely auspicious. Thus, she was often invited to the palace to accompany her. The late emperor also often saw her at the Phoenix Algae Palace. To win Empress Ju's favor, he personally conferred her the title of Junju. Xiao Minglan lowered her eyelashes and smiled coldly, You only know half of it. None of you know the other half. When Empress Ju was on the throne, although she was unable to give birth to a prince, she once had a princess. That princess was also her only child, imperial sister Xiao Mingjia, who was 4 years older than me. However, she was different from her mother, who had superb skills and an imposing manner. Because she was born weak, she was bedridden all year round. Even the most skilled imperial physician could not guarantee that she would live past the age of marriageable age even at the risk of being beheaded. Empress Ju racked her brains for her only daughter. She was physically and mentally exhausted. She did not hesitate to search all over the 9 prefectures for the sake of extending Xiao Mingjia's life by a little. That was until the great Xianghua Temple's old Zen master suggested a way. That was to choose a person who was born on the same year, month, and day as Xiao Mingjia. That person also had the same fate as Xiao Mingjia, and had excellent 4 pillars. The auspicious aura of that person would help Xiao Mingjia resist the evil aura in his fate. Xiahou Qing's mind was as quick as lightning. He quickly understood the meaning of Xiao Minglan's words, so, in the end, Junju Hixin was chosen? Yes, Xiao Minglan sneered, in terms of being a mother, Empress Ju could indeed be considered a loving mother. In order to help her precious daughter resist the disaster, she did not hesitate to use other people's daughters. She meticulously designed a good show to keep everyone in the dark. Then, she casually threw out a gift that made people grateful and overwhelmed. This was the royal grace that she was best at. Xiahou Qing now knew that it was no wonder that Junju Hixin, who was an ordinary court lady, could unexpectedly catch Empress Ju's eye and was often summoned to the palace to accompany her. She was even favored by the late emperor and was granted the title of Junju Hixin. An exception. It turned out that the existence of Princess Hexin was a long and drawn-out scheme. It was truly ridiculous. What happened after that, Prince? Please continue to enlighten me. Junju Hexin was to Xiao Mingjia's body. For 3 years, Junju He lived palace for 3 years for the way, Junju He every day to and, she tus, to an as if and forth, as if she as if. As the like to be used like she to use to and like she. She. To the she is. But gradually, for some unknown reason, Junju Hexin, who was originally as rosy and lively as a rabbit, became weaker and weaker. On the contrary, Xiao Mingjia got better day by day. Junju Hexin, who had not been able to get out of bed for a year, was finally able to step out of the palace. Empress Ju was overjoyed and bestowed Junju Hexin with mountainous rewards. However, Junju Hexin was only naive. She was not really stupid. As she grew older, she seemed to have sensed something or heard some gossip, which made her suspicious. One day, she and Xiao Mingjia had a huge conflict. Even Empress Ju's dissuasion was of no use. The relationship between the two fell into a deadlock and was no longer the same as before. Not long after, Junju Hexin fell ill. Her fever did not subside. Empress Ju had no choice but to send her out of the palace. Who would have thought that on the evening she left the palace, Empress Ju would go crazy? Then, there was that crazy night of blood. It was not until Fourth Imperial Brother brought the Imperial Jade Seal and led troops into the palace to rescue the Emperor that the massacre was stopped. Too many people died in that chaos in the palace. Almost everyone in Phoenix Algae Palace died. After thinking about it, only Junju Hexin is still alive. Xiahou Shizi, only her. Chapter 565. Prince, you mean? Xiahou Qing's brows furrowed. But Princess Hexin herself is in prison. Xiao Minglan was confused. She rubbed her temples and said, I don't know. I don't know who to trust in today's world, and who is worthy of my trust. All these years, I couldn't figure out why Princess Hexin fell ill at such a timely time. If it wasn't for that emergency, what would have happened to her? With Empress Ju's scheming mind, would she have predicted it in advance and made other arrangements? Later, I always wanted to ask Princess Hexin what happened that day, but I heard that after she woke up, the memory disappeared inexplicably. So it was left unsettled. Xiao Minglan's last voice was like a wisp of formless smoke. Once it dispersed, there was no trace of it. Prince Xiahou, that's all I know. I'm afraid that I can't unravel some mysteries in my lifetime. I can only leave it to you, please. It was already 2/4 in the afternoon when they came out of Prince Ku's mansion. Ju Sai helped Xiahou Qing into the carriage. When the carriage was 3 miles away from the prince's mansion, he said in a low voice, Prince Ku, is what Prince Ku said just now credible? Xiahou Qing leaned on the soft cushion and concentrated. There was an incense burning in front of him. The smoke was mixed with the fragrance of medicine that could suppress the pain in his limbs and bones. He slowly shook his head. Half of what he said is true and half of it is false. But the past he said is true and sincere. The cause and effect are all connected. I really can't tell which is true and which is false. Indeed. Because there are not many people who have witnessed the past and are still alive in this world. Because no matter what he said, we can't tell the truth. But there are still a few small flaws in his carefully woven lies. Bring me tea. Xiahou Qing stretched out his finger and dipped it into the cold tea that Juicy handed him. Then, he copied Ning Shu's previous appearance on the small table in front of him and wrote the word one in the shape of a red-crowned crane flying through the air. In his description, Empress Ju is an extremely deep and vicious person. She is the opposite of the intelligent, sensible, decent and kind Empress Ju described by Duke Ning. They are like two completely different people. This is one of the reasons. Second, Prince Ku repeatedly emphasized that he was less than 6 years old when the palace rebellion happened, so no one suspected him. But who was the person he wanted to deal with? The most terrible Empress Ju in his words. How could such a meticulous woman, whose heart was as vicious as a snake and scorpion, not have noticed his secret spying and did not take any measures against him? It doesn't make sense. Finally, did you notice that when he was talking about Empress Ju's death, he inadvertently said, "I thought that after Empress Ju's death, our great hatred was avenged and the coffin closed. I didn't expect that the vengeful spirit would come back full of resentment." There is a very special word in this sentence. After following Xiahou Qing for 10 years, Ju Sai was very sharp and immediately reacted, "Resentment?" "Yes." Xiahou Qing nodded and tapped his fingertips on the small table. "What is resentment?" If an honest person walked on the mountain and fell to his death for no reason, he wouldn't be resentful. Most people would just admit that they were unlucky and blame themselves for being careless. If a person who killed people like Scything Flax was killed for revenge, he wouldn't be resentful. The justice of heaven should be like this. Even if he were to be resentful, it would be anger. So to be resentful, it must be in a situation where the person was unguarded and exposed their back to the person they trusted, but was suddenly betrayed. The anger in the heart can't dissipate and accumulates. Mixed with monstrous hatred, it can give birth to resentment that makes one's heart tremble. Why did he subconsciously say those words? Did it mean that the truth was completely different from what he said? In that great chaos, the siblings weren't innocent victims, but the people holding the sharp blade. Chapter 566. Ju Sai was puzzled. "Shizzy, then why did you tell him about the plum blossom kiss?" Xiahou Qing dipped his finger in the tea and continued to draw on the table. "Firstly, if I didn't throw out my peach, how could he throw out his plum?" Although his narration just now was a mixture of truth and falsehood, the general outline had been revealed, and many of the mysteries had been solved. Therefore, it wasn't a wasted trip. Secondly, a few years ago, Father tried his best to hide the fact that I lost my sense of smell and taste. However, some people might not know about it. In addition, after I became blind, everyone who should have guessed it has already guessed it. Rather than deceiving myself, it's better to reveal the truth. When the situation is more chaotic, some things will be clearer. Tonight, send someone to spread the news that Nanping Shizzy was poisoned by the plum blossom kiss and is in danger. You should be able to catch a big fish. Xiahou Qing stopped drawing and coughed heavily. Ju Sai immediately asked worriedly, "Shizzy?" Xiahou Qing waved his hand and said in a hoarse voice, "It's fine." He pointed to a small portrait on the table that he had sketched out with tea and asked, "Does she look like this?" Ju Sai was stunned. Only then did he realize who the she that the crown prince was talking about was. He bent over and looked at the small black sandalwood table. On the small table, there was a small figure painted with tea water that was sparkling. The small figure had 2 willow leaf-like eyebrows, smiling eyes, and the slightly upward curve of her lips hid a touch of quick-wittedness and craftiness. For some reason, Ju Sai's nose twitched. He said in a low voice, "Yes, when Lady Ning played tricks on Huemore and the others, her appearance was exactly the same as you imagined. However, her eyes were a little bigger. Recently, she had lost some weight and her chin was a little sharper." Xiahou Qing nodded and said with a smile, "In the end, they can't be drawn the same. I always thought that if I was lucky enough to be reborn in my next life, I would definitely not drink Meng Po's soup. Then, I would find her as soon as possible and lock her up. I would lock her up and make her my wife. But I'm also worried. I clearly don't know what she looks like. What if I recognize the wrong person?" Ju Sai couldn't answer this kind of question, and neither could the blue and cloudless sky. Only a wisp of wind quietly drifted over and blew away the water stains on the table, leaving no trace behind. 10 miles away, Ning Shu felt a sharp pain in her heart. It was so painful that her heart clenched. In front of him, a woman with a big nose and a fat face sat on the ground with tears and snot. She's called Ling. She was picked up by my man on the road when he was chopping firewood in the mountains. At that time, when he picked her up, her body was in a mess and her clothes were not even in shape. She looked to be around 11 or 12 years old, thin and small, and almost died. My man pitied her and brought her back. I fed her food and water, and even went to the clinic to invite a doctor. I treated her like a grandaunt, and only then did I save her life. She said she was an orphan. Her parents had passed away when she was young, and she had no one to rely on. She begged us to take her in. My family was actually not rich, and it was difficult for us to support ourselves. However, that girl repeatedly kowtowed and begged. Our family's hearts softened, and only then did we reluctantly take her in. But who knew that the girl was actually an ingrate? In less than a month, she began to show her true colors. Seeing that we husband and wife had good tempers, were lazy all day long, were full of lies, and even stole things. We were so angry that we used our status as elders to admonish her. However, she did not repent in the slightest. Every time she stole a bit of silver from me, she would run out to spend it. After she finished spending it, she would run back to pester us. She stuck to my family like a sticky candy and did not let go. My family really did not know what to do with her. We could not bear to directly report her to the authorities, so we could only swallow our anger. 3 days ago, a silver bracelet that was part of my dowry was stolen by her. Sigh. I thought it should be the same as before, so I did not take it to heart. Who knew that I would see this kind of thing in the bushes behind the house today? Officials, this really has nothing to do with my family. I beg you to investigate clearly. You must not let a good person not have a good reward. Chapter 567. Ning Shu had just asked this woman a few questions when she was greeted with a barrage of wails and complaints. It was so loud that her ears hurt. Ning Shu sighed and rubbed her tortured ears. Her eyes swept over the woman's rosy and plump face that had not shed a single tear after howling for a long time. She then glanced at the jade bracelet that was not hidden well under her sleeve. She really did not know how she could say that my family is actually not rich. It's difficult for me to even support myself. She smiled and quickly interrupted the woman before she could finish her tirade. She put her hands behind her back and praised her generously. You're called Zhu Huanyang, right? You're really admirable. Your family is in such a difficult situation, yet you're willing to take in a lonely girl. This kind of kindness is hard to come by. We should report your family to the Jingji government and then report it to the imperial court. You'll definitely receive His Majesty's praise. Your family will be the role model of Mulan Lane so that the people of the western part of the city will be proud of your family. Zhu Huanyang's act was not over yet. She was praised so fiercely that she did not expect her acting skills to be so outstanding. She was stunned for a moment and said shyly, you flatter me. This commoner is ashamed. Beside her, the man called Liu Laosan, who had been kneeling with his head down, also grinned and pretended to be modest. He said, Our ancestors have always taught us to be upright and benevolent. This kind of trivial matter is not worthy of the imperial court's attention. We only need the prefectural magistrate to write a letter to announce our deeds and allow our family to be enshrined in the ancestral hall so that future generations will know what we have done. Ning Shu nodded. That's simple. Our Shaoqing and prefectural magistrate Wei will stand in front of each other in the imperial court. It's just a matter of one sentence. Shaoqing, right? Tan Siwei smiled and nodded in agreement. Of course. One sentence is not enough. 2 or 3 sentences are not too much. Ning Shu clapped her hands and praised, That's great. Zhu Huanyang's eyes brightened. She was about to grin when she saw Tan Siwei's expression suddenly change. His face turned cold and he said angrily, How dare you, commoner, deceive an official of the imperial court? You're confusing right and wrong. How should you be punished? Keep your mouth shut. If you dare to make a scene or make a fuss when I'm interrogating you, you'll be served with a slap. Hui Mo immediately glared at her. He pressed his hand on the sword and stood beside her, ready to punish her at any time. Zhu Huanyang's pig-slaughtering howl that was about to leave her mouth was immediately blocked in her throat. Her man was so scared that his legs went soft. Just then, they heard the smiling and extremely amiable official tear apart their faces one by one. You said that your family is in trouble. Do you think this official is blind? Your family lives in a 2-story house. Although you can't be considered wealthy, you have nothing to do with the word poor. Therefore, all your flattery is a lie. Also, you said that this girl was rescued by your husband when he went up the mountain to chop firewood. I've already sent people to investigate your family. You're a vegetable vendor in the city. Every day, you go to the outskirts of the city to transport vegetables to the city. Whichever family needs them, you'll deliver them to their door. Which mountain did he climb and which firewood did he chop? Zhu Huanyang and her husband's faces trembled. Their faces turned green as if they were slapped in the face. They began to panic. Zhu Huanyang was the first to cry out, "My lord, what kind of people are trying to frame my family? My family's house does look good. However, it's passed down from my ancestors. It's an empty shell. In fact, it's an embroidered pillow. It looks good on the outside but it's empty inside. However, those people who have no conscience don't know. They're blindly jealous and secretly hate. Therefore, they spread bad rumors about my family everywhere." Chapter 568. Her husband, Liu Laosan, continued to shout, Yes, that's exactly the case. Although my family carries vegetables for the various restaurants and mansions, we have always strictly abided by our duties and never dared to earn any more money from the vegetable farmers. When there was a flood or drought, we pitied the vegetable farmers and often gave them some money instead. That's why our family is so poor that we can't even afford to eat. We thought of chopping some firewood on the way home to save a few copper coins for our family to survive. As he spoke, he even squeezed out a few drops of crocodile tears. Tan Siwei had seen many shameless people, but this level of shamelessness was truly an eye-opener. He sneered, "Then what's going on with this matter? You said that the girl was 11 or 12 years old and begged you to take her in. She often had dirty hands and feet. How come this official heard that she personally told the neighbor's aunt that she was only 10 years old and that she often ran out not to steal, but because she couldn't stand being beaten, scolded, and humiliated by you, so she ran out to survive?" Zhu Huanyang's eyes darted around. She steeled her heart and straightened her neck. "Ari, that girl is too good at acting. In the beginning, she also coaxed us with a tearful voice. That's why we were fooled. I didn't expect that she would spread rumors about us husband and wife after making a mistake. The human heart is truly sinister. I'm afraid this is what the teachers mean by biting the hand that feeds you." Her glib tongue almost made Ning Shu laugh. Tan Siwei snorted heavily and raised his voice, "You're still quibbling." Liu Laosan glared and said with righteous indignation, "Official, we're all honest people. You can't arbitrarily convict us just because you heard a few words of gossip. We're not allowed to defend ourselves." He raised his neck and cried out in grievance, "Oh heavens, listen to this. This group of people who wear official robes have inhuman hearts. They want us to be wronged to death. I beg you to quickly send down the snow in June." Seeing that the couple was about to make a big deal out of this, pouring bucket after bucket of dirty water, Ning Shu couldn't stand the second round of bombardment. She stood up and said, "I know why." Coldly glancing at them, Ning Shu said sharply, "The reason I can't leave your family is because your family has a mentally handicapped eldest son who can't find a wife in his 20s. So you're overjoyed, thinking that God has given you a ready-made daughter-in-law for free, and you don't even need a single copper coin. She had no parents and no one to cry to. She could even work like a cow or a horse for her family. That was simply wonderful. But in the next moment, you're worried. What if she understands your thoughts and runs away after she recovers? After all, she had 4 legs and he couldn't keep looking at her all the time. If the neighbors found out about it and reported it to the authorities, it would be really troublesome. So you racked your brains and came up with a plan. It's easy. While the girl is still sick and confused, you can trick her into signing a marriage contract. Then you can hold her life in your hands. As for her saying that she's only 10 years old, it doesn't matter. She can say that she's 2 years older. This way, you don't have to wait until she's 15 years old. You can marry her 2 years earlier. At that time, she'll be a chicken or a duck in a cage, a pig or a dog tied with a rope. She won't be able to leave your house anymore. Zhu Huanyang refuted without thinking. What nonsense are you talking about? That marriage contract was signed by her willingly to repay us for saving her life. Seeing that the stupid donkey took the bait, Ning Shu smiled. There really is a marriage contract. Then it's easy. According to the law of our dynasty, there must be a witness to sign a marriage contract. Do you have a witness in your house? A drop of sweat fell from Liu Laosan's forehead. Of course, I do. My family's. Yes, my uncle is a famous old man in Mulan Lane. If you don't believe me, you can invite him here and we can confront each other in the past. Then do you know that the witness also has to sign the marriage contract before it counts? My uncle is old, and he can't hold a pen. So, he can't sign on it. The marriage contract not only needs to have your son's handprint, but also yours and yours. That shouldn't be missing, right? Yes, wait for me to personally bring the marriage contract to you, then you'll believe me. Liu Laosan gave his wife a look and hurriedly staggered to his feet. Ning Shu immediately scolded, "Stop him. Go get it yourself. Don't tell me you want to quickly add a stroke to the marriage contract. Let me tell you, my Great Yu dynasty doesn't have any law that requires the handprint of the parents-in-law to be added to the marriage contract. I've seen too many shameless people in my life, but people as disgusting as you are really disgusting. Just now, my family's lord said that if you dare to distort the truth again, you'll be slapped. Come, immediately start the punishment." Chapter 569. One by one, the crisp slaps landed on the couple's face, making their faces as swollen as a pig's head. Just when they were about to cry, Hui Mo mercilessly covered their mouths. This time, they really cried, but they could only hit their teeth and let the tears flow. After 50 slaps, the couple could only lie on the ground and gasp for breath. They didn't even have the strength to cry. At this time, a tall and strong man in his 20s ran out of the house. He didn't look at Ning Shu, Tan Siwei, and the other people. He also didn't look at the government officials. He even turned a blind eye to the miserable state of Liu Laosan and Zhu Huanyang. Instead, he shouted loudly, "Father, mother, where is my wife? Didn't you say that my wife will come back hungry soon? Why hasn't she come back yet? Why hasn't she come back yet? Hunger wants to be a good wife. I want to kiss my wife and sleep. I haven't slept yet. Father, mother, bring her back." As he spoke, he couldn't help drooling. His eyes were unfocused, and his face was full of idiocy. It was hard to imagine that such an adult man wanted to bully a 10-year-old girl. Ning Shu only had time to drink half a bowl of plum soup. She couldn't help but feel nauseous. She wanted to turn around and vomit. Hui Mo's hands were itchy. He wanted to pull out his sword and kill this scumbag directly. However, the case hadn't been solved yet, so he had to force himself to endure it. He tied the idiot up and forced him to kneel on the ground. The idiot was very strong. He resisted for a while before he was subdued. It was hard to imagine how the little girl, who had just turned 10 years old, had struggled and cried in the pitch-black darkness to escape from the pair of demonic claws and wait for the light to shine in at dawn. Ning Shu pressed Hui Mo's shoulder and then bent down to look at the vicious couple. "Now, it's time for you to tell us everything." The man surnamed Liu was still stubborn. "We don't know anything. What can you do to us? Were they going to extort a confession through torture? That's against the law. Be careful or I'll sue you. We may not hurt you, but we can't guarantee that your precious son won't have some small accidents, such as suddenly falling or accidentally cutting himself with a knife. After all, he doesn't know anything." The couple finally showed their first real fear of the day. "We'll talk, we'll tell you everything. Please don't touch my son, he's just a child." Coming out of Mulan Lane, Hui Mo has a lot of dirty words to say. However, he doesn't want to say it because he has been educated in the prince's mansion for many years. He can only hit the innocent tree with his fist. The other hand is holding the token left by the girl, an old red rope. This is too much. Simply. How could there be such disgusting parents in this world? Their son was as strong as a pig, yet they could still shamelessly say that he was just a child. Chapter 570. Ning Shu is holding a charcoal pencil in her hand. She marks all the crime locations and the corresponding houses one by one on the map. Looking at the marks she has made, she frowns slightly and her eyes quickly jump from one point to another. Fine beads of sweat from her forehead roll down from her cheeks to her neck and soak her collar. Under the hot sun, she suddenly raises her head and says, "I see." Hui Mo stuck his head out and looked at the messy markings for a long time. He was confused. What? Is there any pattern? What's going on? Ning Shu's slender fingers quickly point on the map. Her eyes are like torches. We have been deliberately misled before. We have been sticking to the crime locations and were led by the nose to the fork. But in fact, you see, if we don't pay attention to the east and west of the city, and don't pay attention to the crime locations, we can observe the houses where the children are lost. Tan Siwei's reaction is not slow. He quickly finds something strange. From east to north counterclockwise, the distances of these 4 points are almost equal. There's only one piece missing from the southeast corner. Yes, if the missing corner is filled, and the palace located in the middle of the capital city is the center, it will form a pattern. What do you think it is? Ning Shu says and adds the last stroke on the map with a charcoal pencil. She looks at Hui Mo's confused eyes and adds, "Maybe you can think of those strange black spell rubbing pictures and you will be inspired." Being enlightened, Hui Mo hurriedly takes out the rubbing picture and covers the palace. When he sees the shape of the pattern, he suddenly has goosebumps and exclaims, "It's like the stamen of a flower." These pictures with a circle and dozens of black lines look like the stamen of a flower, and the positions of these houses are like the petals of a flower around the stamen. 5. Is it plum? The paper in his hand falls down. Hui Mo is stunned and can't say a word for a long time. Is there anything strange about the picture of plum blossoms? Tan Siwei doesn't understand why Hui Mo looks like he has seen a ghost. Hui Mo gritted his teeth and picked up the drawing without saying a word. Ning Shu looked at the sun that was already setting in the west. She resisted the dizziness and licked her dry lips. No matter what kind of pattern it is, at least the murderer's last target is probably here. There are still more than 2 hours before it gets dark. What we should do now is to immediately find the 5th child and rush there to stop the murderer from stealing the 5th child. We might even catch the rat hiding in the gutter. Tan Siwei nodded. I remember that the southeast corner is called Zheng De Fang. I dealt with it last year. If I rush over now, I'll definitely be able to make it. They immediately set off. Tan Siwei rode his horse and led the way. Hui Mo drove the carriage with Ning Shu and followed closely behind. He pursed his lips and didn't say a word. No one knew what he was thinking. After the carriage drove for 2 or 3 miles, Hui Mo finally couldn't bear it anymore. He gritted his teeth and slowed down the horse's hooves. He turned his head and looked at the slim and hazy figure behind the bamboo curtain. He whispered, "Miss Ning, do you remember everything?" Behind the bamboo curtain, Ning Shu drank the 3rd cup of tea and finally soothed her dry throat. She sat in the place where Xiaoho Qing usually sat today. She closed her eyes and listened to the flow of people outside the carriage. She lowered her eyelashes and smiled. "What do you think?" Hui Mo frowned. He was a little angry. "When you asked about the case today, I noticed that something was wrong with you. You were very organized and your thoughts were very clear." Ning Shu raised her eyebrows. "Do you mean that I was not smart when I lost my memory? I was like a fool." Hui Mo shook his head. "No, you were very smart when you lost your memory. But it was different. You were very resistant to everyone at that time, except for Shizzy. But today, when Dong Bao's mother fainted, you actually helped her. Also, you spoke very slowly before. Even yesterday, you were still like this in front of Shizzy. But today, you are obviously much better. There are other expressions and small movements. Although it is not obvious, I am not a fool. The most important thing is the pattern just now. There are many five-petaled flowers, such as peach blossoms, pear blossoms, lilacs, and so on. But when I blurted out the name plum blossoms, you were not surprised at all. You didn't question it. You didn't know the special features of this flower when you lost your memory. The only possibility is that you have recovered your memory. After that, Huimo frowned and was very angry. When did you recover your memory? Why did you hide it from us? Why did you hide it from Shizzy? What do you want to do? Through the bamboo curtain, Ning Shu saw that he was angry but didn't dare to explode. She held her chin and teased him. You'll have a whole new level of respect after 3 days. The ancients didn't lie to me. I didn't expect our brother Huemo to be so smart now. Even I can't fool you. Huimo got even angrier after being ridiculed. You didn't want to hide it from me at all. Tell me, what do you want to do? If you don't tell me, I will go and tell Shizzy. Chapter 571. Ning Shu lifted a corner of the bamboo curtain and smiled. Don't get angry. The sun is hot and the heat is strong. Young man, it's easy to get rid of the heat. How can you say such things? Huimo was ashamed and angry. He took out a cloud-piercing arrow from his sleeve and was about to shoot. Ning Shu saw that the rabbit was anxious and quickly comforted him. Ning Shu patted his shoulder. Okay, I'll tell you. I did recover my memory, but it wasn't long ago. Yesterday, when I returned to the Duke's estate and saw my family, I naturally remembered. As for what I want to do, I don't want to do anything. I didn't take the initiative to tell you because your Shizzy is so cold to me. If I rush to tell him, it will look like I'm shamelessly clinging onto him. After all, as a woman, I also want to save face. There's a good saying, if he's heartless, I'll stop. If he ignores me, I'll ignore him. In the future, when I find a better husband, I'll pull him in front of me and make him regret it. He'll come crying to me and beg me to stay. Huimo looked at her suspiciously. Really? Ning Shu blinked her eyes. Then tell me, could it be that I'm plotting something? If I'm plotting something, how could I let you discover my abnormality so easily? Huimo racked his brain, but he couldn't think of any other reason for her to hide her memory. Could it be, as she said, that she was just throwing a tantrum and didn't want to talk? So troublesome, a woman's mind was too hard to guess. That's right, before I tell him, you're not allowed to tell your Shizzy. He dares to anger me like this, I'll definitely get revenge. Otherwise, when I become your Shizzy's wife, I'll make trouble for you every day and send you to the border. You'll never be able to return to the capital and you'll never have the chance to see the 13th princess again. Huimo's face turned red and he said with a guilty conscience, what nonsense are you talking about? Why would I want to see the 13th princess? I don't have anything with her. Nothing. Then next time I see Princess Changping, I'll pass on your message to her. Don't come looking for trouble with our little brother Huimo. It's best if she stays 10 zhong away. Our little brother Huimo is exhausted from dealing with her and has no interest in her. You demon. After successfully tricking Huemo, Ning Shu puts down the bamboo curtain with an evil smile. Huimo's face was red with embarrassment. He turned his grief and anger into strength and waved his whip to catch up with Tan Sui's horse. Therefore, he did not see Ning Shu's smile disappear behind his back. She slowly exhaled and her long eyelashes drooped with complicated waves of light. 1 horse and 1 carriage rushed to Zhengde Fang in the southeast corner of the capital at the fastest speed. It was one of the most dilapidated places in the capital. It once had a short period of glory, but about 40 to 50 years ago, there was an extremely serious smallpox outbreak here. Many people died, and those who were slightly richer moved away with their families. Only a few people who were so poor that they were waiting to die were forced to stay here. Those who died were taken to a mass grave and burned to ashes. Those who survived continued to live here for generations. Because the rent was cheap, over time, a large group of poor people gathered here, and it became a famous rundown place in the capital. If our guess is correct, the culprit's 5th target should be around here. There should be around 10 houses. We'll look for each house with children. Currently, we have 2 methods. First, gather these children and ensure their safety. We won't let the culprit have a chance to take advantage of them. Second, Tan Siwei looked at Ning Shu with some hesitation. Ning Shu said, "You want to say that we'll set a fishing line and send people to keep an eye on these children? We'll use them as bait to catch the culprit behind the scenes?" Chapter 572. Tan Siwei lowered his head in shame. Yes. The murderer is meticulous and didn't leave any clues. This may be the last time he makes a move. If we don't seize this opportunity, it may be difficult to catch him. But if we take such a risk, I can't guarantee the safety of the children. Ning Shu understood what he meant. The murderer was cruel by nature. Previously, he had thrown a broken finger to the imperial mausoleum as a demonstration. It was a small finger, only an inch long. It was soft like a newly sprouted willow branch in spring. But the willow branch was broken before it had time to grow new leaves. In case the murderer found out during the tracking process, they really couldn't guarantee that the murderer wouldn't take the opportunity to kill the children in desperation. Hui Mo frowned. Then what should we do? If we save the children, we can't catch the murderer. If we catch the murderer, we may harm a child. We have to make a choice between one child and 4 missing children. Isn't this a hopeless situation? Thinking about it made people bald. The noisy sound of cicadas kept knocking on their ears, making people upset. It was already sunset, but the boredom didn't disappear. Instead, it made people more anxious because of the current situation. A drop of sweat slipped from her eyebrows into her eyes. Ning Shu closed her eyes. It was very painful. The golden and purple sky fell at a speed visible to the naked eye, like rapid drumbeats, urging people to make a decision quickly. Ning Shu took a long breath. Let's find the children around here first. We don't have the right to risk other people's lives, and we can't decide for them whether to be heroes or not. They no longer entangled and divided into 2 groups to inquire about the neighbors here. Hui Mo was responsible for standing on a high place to see if there were any suspicious people. There is a family at the end of the street who just gave birth to a child last year. He hasn't learned to speak yet. He is in his mother's arms all day long, so we can rule him out. Tan Siwei ran over with a head full of sweat. His face was flushed red as he explained the information he had just discovered. There's a 14-year-old boy at the end of the alley. Although he's not yet an adult, he's already begun to take shape. He can't be considered a child. He's currently working as an apprentice in the scissors workshop. The family next door has an 8.5-year-old child who fits the age, but has recently taken the child back to his mother's home and isn't here. Oh right, there's a 13-year-old girl in the alley. She fled to the capital with her parents during the famine a few years ago. Because her left leg is injured, she doesn't go out often and doesn't have much contact with outsiders. Ning Shu nodded. So far, among the targets that the murderer has chosen, the oldest is Ling who is 10 years old, and the youngest is Zhao Mian who is 7 years old. They are both children who are neither too old nor too young, who often come into contact with outsiders. They have their own ideas, and are at an age where they are easily influenced by others. Based on this analysis, the possibility of these children being targeted by the murderer is not high. Tan Siwei wiped the sweat off his forehead. His eyes were focused on Ning Shu's figure. That's all I've found out. Miss Ning, how are things on your side? Ning Shu's pink lips were tightly pursed. She didn't know where to start. She grabbed Tan Siwei's sleeve and said, shouting, "Come with me to take a look." Tan Siwei blinked his eyes suspiciously and ran after Ning Shu. It wasn't until they stood in front of the dilapidated building under the old pagoda tree in the west that he opened his mouth in shock. It was only then that he understood why Ning Shu had such a difficult expression. That was because the small building could no longer be considered a house. Half of the building had already collapsed, and only the other half was still hanging on. A broken beam lay across the building, ready to fall at any time, leaking light and wind everywhere. A broken table was picked up from somewhere. It only had 3 legs, and one of them had to be tied to a pillar to barely stand. Other than the broken table and 2 low stools, the few straw mats in the corner were the only belongings in the house. On the straw mats, 4 lean little beggars were gathered together. They gritted their teeth and glared at the group of unfamiliar villains with their clear black and white eyes. Chapter 573. The oldest boy shielded the other children behind him and glared at them fiercely. "What do you want to do? Get out of our house." They called such a shabby place that could collapse at any time home. Tan Siwei and Ning Shu looked at each other and heaved a sigh of relief. They bent their knees and kept a safe distance from them. "Don't be afraid. We're not here to hurt you. We're from the government and we're here to investigate a case. We have some questions to ask you. Is that okay?" The child took out a rusty machete from under the straw mat and pointed it at them angrily. "What kind of trick is this? You tricked us like this last time. You said you were from the government and wanted to arrange a place for us because we were homeless. In the end, you tricked us to the suburbs and almost sold us. That was the last time we believed you. This time, we won't be fooled again. Get out. Get out." In the face of such undisguised resistance, Tan Siwei had to soften his voice. He took out his waist token and threw it in front of the children, trying to win their trust. "We're really from the government, not human traffickers. We have the token as proof. You can pick it up and take a look. The red seal on the back can't be faked." The child looked like a hedgehog with its hair standing on end. He glanced at the token and sneered. "I don't care if you have the token or not. I only know that even if you're from the government, you're not welcome here. When my father was beaten to death by a bully, I went to the government office and knelt for a whole day. No one made a decision for my family, so I was kicked out. Xiaomo's brother's leg was broken because he offended the private advisor of a big official. He didn't have money to treat his injury and died from the pain. Sister Qinxin's father was obviously a good person, but he was framed for stealing money and killed. We tried to believe you. But what about you? Whenever someone loses their purse, they suspect that we stole it. When they see us on the street behind the restaurant, they chase us away. They don't give us a way out. Whether you're really investigating a case or not, you've never treated us beggars well. Why should we help you? Listen, get out of our house. Don't dirty our place, otherwise, we won't let you off easily." Among the 4 children, there were 3 boys. Their skinny limbs barely supported their big heads. Each of them held a machete in their hands, protecting the only girl in the innermost circle. They formed the world's most vulnerable army. These children had suffered too much. Their trust in the world and the adults had long since disappeared. It was clear that they were unwilling to cooperate. Tan Siwei stood up and shook his head helplessly at Ning Shu. Ning Shu also let out a long sigh. Facing this group of children, no one could ask them to easily trust them. But she raised her head to look outside the house. The setting sun had officially taken away the last of the beauty's face, leaving only a dim afterglow. Night was about to come. Her eyes quickly swept across the room, from the 7 chipped bowls on the table to the 2 straw mats separated by a rag under the window. She focused on every detail and quickly said, "You should have 7 children here. 5 boys and 2 girls. When I came in, I passed by the big locust tree and found that there were medicinal dregs under the roots of the locust tree. They were half-dried by the sun. This means that one of your children is sick. It should be the little girl in the middle who you're protecting. The smell of the dregs isn't strong. There's also no strong smell of medicine in this room. This means that the medicine has been boiled many times and is no longer effective. So you need money urgently to buy new medicine to treat her. Apart from you, the other 3 children who are older than you should be thinking of ways to get money, right? I don't care if you're willing to believe me or not, but you have no other choice now. First, your little sister can't even stand properly. If you can't find medicine soon, she'll die soon. I have an ingot of silver here. You can take it. Even if we sell her, at least you can save her. Second, you've been wandering the streets all day to make a living. You should have heard of the cases of missing children in the capital. We've tracked it down until now and calculated that the murderer's next target is likely to be one of you. If you don't tell us the whereabouts of your companions quickly, it'll be too late for regrets. You're a very smart child. You should know the consequences. Chapter 574. He stuffed the silver into his mouth and bit down hard to make sure it was real. The child held the silver in his hand and asked suspiciously, "Are you really the officers investigating the case?" "To be exact, he is, but I am not." Ning Shu pulled out the hairpin behind her head, letting her silky hair cascade down her back. She faced the group of children with the most honest attitude. "My name is Ning Shu. You should have heard of my name." One of the children instinctively took a step forward and asked with his head tilted, "You are that vixen Ning Shu?" Ning Shu's mouth twitched. "Yes. I am that infamous Ning Shu." The children dropped the machetes in their hands and exclaimed in surprise, "Wow! You are our savior. We have to go watch every time you get married. I managed to snatch a few steamed buns and copper coins when you were scattering them along the street. Especially that time when you and young Master Yoon were together. We couldn't get any food for several days. It was all thanks to your steamed buns that our lives were saved. Your steamed buns are too fragrant." Little sister said that she has never eaten such delicious steamed buns. "That's why we're looking forward to when you'll get married next time. That way, we'll be able to fill our stomachs again." "Oh right, when are you getting married next time? We will go and send you off." She never thought that her third failure to marry was the result of so many people's silent prayers. Ning Shu was flattered. All right. When I get married next time, I will definitely send you an invitation in advance. But you don't have to fight for the steamed buns. I will send you 100 in advance. Now, are you willing to believe that I am not an imposter?" "Of course. In this capital, other than you, there is no one else who is willing to admit that they are Ning Shu." She could not refute such a flawless answer. Ning Shu held her forehead and smiled. She tied up her hair again. "Please tell me, where did the other children go?" After removing his wariness, the child called Junna finally revealed his thoughts. Wen was sick for many days and coughed up blood every day. "But we had no money. Brother Xiaomo, sister Qinshin, and brother Xiaoyuan tried to find ways to get money every day. But it was too hard to earn money. Sometimes, we could only get 3 or 4 copper coins by kowtowing for a day. Brother Xiaoyuan said that this was not a solution, so he went to the docks to carry goods. He would only come back when it was dark every day." "Ning Shu, what about you? Do you have food?" Junna, little Junna, since he was young, he stayed at home. A lot of people think that we're unlucky when they ask for too much, but Granny Zhao never despises us. She doesn't even have enough to eat, and she always takes a little from her mouth to help us. How good is she?" Junna nodded. "Yes, Granny Junna. Her family lived in the north of the city, quite far from here. We met on the street. Granny Junna washed clothes for people in exchange for money every day. Once, she met a family of hooligans who framed her for washing damaged clothes and demanded compensation. Sister Qinshin brought us to testify for her, and then we met. She has a little grandson called Zhao Miona, who is our good friend. But Wen has been sick recently, and we haven't seen her for many days." Zhao Miona. After handing the children over to the bailiffs of the Supreme Court and arranging for a doctor, Ning Shu and Tan Siwei quickly walked out of Zhengdefang. Tan Siwei said, "I didn't expect that the connection between the victims that we have been looking for has finally appeared. It seems that the murderer's target is one of them." Ning Shu nodded. "Yes. Since Junna and Zhao Miona are familiar with each other, then there must be some hidden connection between Qian Bao and Wang Xiaosheng. It's just that we haven't found it yet. There must be someone who connected them all together. Let's go to the docks. We must protect the 3 children before it gets completely dark." Ning Shu wiped the sweat on her forehead and said, "This is not the way. There are too many people at the dock. It's dark and no one knows each other. It's a waste of time. Sai, you're lucky that there are still people who care about you. I just walked 2 steps and was avoided by others. I didn't even have time to ask. The water that Hui Mo used to wash his feet was already smelly, and it was steamed by the hot sweat on his body. The smell was so sour that he was despised by everyone. His whole face was wrinkled like a rag. Compared with him, Tan Siwei was much better. His bamboo pattern robe was also wrinkled in the crowd, but at least he still had the temperament to support himself. He looked at Hui Mo sympathetically and said, "Directly revealing the identity of the government will not only alert the enemy, but also may expand the public opinion. We have to think of a way quickly." Ning Shu lowered her head and thought for a while. She smiled and said, "Problems that can be solved with money are not problems." Hui Mo blinked. "What do you mean?" Ning Shu raised her head and looked at him with a smile. "Your mansion should not be short of money, right?" "Hui Mo, is it too late for me to leave now?" Soon, Hui Mo picked up a lantern and flew up to the small building next to him. He stood on the railing and sprinkled hundreds of copper coins into the sky. "Look, look, 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 100 taels of silver to find a pet. My master has a snow-white Pekingese as his pet. When he was passing by here, he accidentally lost his pet. My master is very anxious. Everyone, old and young, come and have a look. As long as you can provide clues about this pet, I will give you 10 taels of silver for one, 20 taels of silver for two, or 100 taels of silver for two. Even if you don't have any clues, if you come to join in the fun and spread the news, you can also get 10 copper coins for free. Don't miss this opportunity. For ordinary workers, they can only earn a dozen copper coins by carrying bags for a day. 100 taels of silver was something that they could never dream of in their lifetime. His shout immediately attracted hundreds of people to stop and squeeze over to grab the copper coins. It was very lively. Come, come, come. Everyone, calm down. Speak one by one. Seeing that Hui Mo was busy dealing with these workers, Ning Shu winked at him from a distance and manually praised him. Although this trick was simple, since those children came here to find a way to make money, as long as they heard that they could get copper coins for free, they will definitely rush over without hesitation. It will greatly shorten the time to find the pet. Hui Mo's eyes were sharp. Standing at a high place, he saw a few children hurriedly walking up the deck and running towards them. He hurriedly winked at Ning Shu, who was downstairs. "They're coming, they seem to be the ones over there." Ning Shu turned her head and immediately squeezed out of the crowd to greet the children. But at the next moment, something unexpected happened. Chapter 576. Hundreds of cargo workers on the shore heard the news and rushed over to grab the copper coins. Hui Mo was surrounded so tightly that almost no one noticed the 3 children running out of the big black ship. In the misty night, they were like 3 small stones, stumbling into the human world. "Mo, Qinshin, run faster. If we are late, the copper coins will be taken away." "Yes, yes. We have to grab more later. That way, Wen will be able to use the medicine. Be careful, the deck is a bit slippery." Xiao Yuan and Mo ran in front, and the thinner Qinshin followed closely behind. The 2 teenagers jumped off the ship and reached out to Qinshin. They supported each other and ran towards Ning Shu. As they got closer and closer, Ning Shu could not help but feel excited. But when the children were only 100 steps away from Ning Shu, the tall pile of sacks suddenly fell towards them. A fire rose from the ground and surrounded them from all directions. There was nowhere to run. Screams pierced through the night sky. Ning Shu trembled. She screamed and ran towards the children. "Quick, put out the fire, put out the fire." But the weak voice was easily drowned out by the noise of people fighting for the copper coins. When the fire became bigger and bigger, the burning smoke choked them. The painful cries in the fire finally woke people up. In the middle of the fire, the 3 short figures were like small animals that had nowhere to go. They were running in all directions in the raging fire, but they were doomed to die. In a moment of silence, there was a sudden panic. "Fire! There was a fire! Where is the bucket? Quick, quick, quick! Go get it!" Ning Shu did not care about anything else. She rushed towards the fire circle, but Tan Siwei pulled her behind him. Tan Siwei was unprecedentedly strong. "The fire is too big. If you rush in, you will die. I will go." He picked up a half-filled bucket of water from the shore and poured it over his head. Then, he covered his mouth and nose and rushed into the fire without a care for his own safety. Just as he stepped in, more and more sacks fell down. Like boiling oil into fire, they rose into the sky, wanting to burn everything clean. The hot water vapor in the air condensed into thousands of ice knives in an instant, piercing her limbs and bones, making her unable to move. Ning-Shu gasped, shouting. Hui Mo had already rushed over and shouted, "Help put out the fire. 10 copper coins for a bucket of water. Quick!" The whole shore was in a mess. Hundreds of people were in a hurry. After half an hour, the fire was completely put out. The black muddy water mixed with the pungent smell flowed half of the dock. Ning-Shu's entire body trembled as she rushed over, desperately searching and shouting in the scorched mess. Only then did she find Tan Siwei buried under a pile of broken sacks filled with sand and stones in the corner. Apparently, during the fire just now, these sacks just happened to fall on his body, knocking him out and causing some flesh wounds, but at least his life was saved. Ning-Shu closed her eyes and turned her head with a hoarse voice. "Where are the children? We are looking for them." Yong Chengwei rushed over and sent the unconscious Tan Siwei to the medical center for treatment. But the rest of the people searched the whole ruins and could not find any trace of the children. Logically speaking, even if the children were unfortunately burned to death and their flesh was burned, there should at least be a few charred bones left. But strangely, there was nothing. These children were like a puff of smoke, silent and formless, dispersing into the air along with the billowing black smoke, mysteriously and bizarrely disappearing. Chapter 577. The officers who rushed to the scene searched the entire crime scene 3 times, but only found a few strangely shaped, half-burnt pieces of wood among the piles of sand and stones. As for the child, he had vanished into thin air. How could this be? Is there something wrong with our eyes? Or are we hallucinating together? I clearly saw the children hiding in the fire and crying for help. How could they suddenly disappear? Hui Mo was exhausted and sat down on the ground. He was puzzled. Could it be that the 2 children ran away? But it was such a big fire. Even if an adult encountered such a dangerous thing, it would be difficult to escape. How could the children escape? If they ran away, where could they go? Could it be that they had wings and flew away from the sky? This was too ridiculous. It wasn't like this was some kind of supernatural novel. Ning-Shu also had a big headache. Her body was burned. Looking at the black water on the ground and the oil and powder floating in the black water, she sighed and bent down to pick up a small piece of the black water. She sniffed and her eyes flashed. Wood chips and tung oil? She raised her head. I know how the fire started. The oil floating in the black water is tung oil. Because it is black, it is very difficult to detect at night. The murderer scattered a circle here in advance. As long as the target stepped into the circle, he would immediately ignite the fire and form a circle of fire. Originally, these fallen sand and stones would not be able to catch fire, but the bad thing is that they are mixed with a large amount of wood shavings, making them light and swollen. Once they come into contact with the sparks from the burning tung oil, they will spread into a vast sea of fire in the shortest amount of time, and no one will be able to escape. Hui Mo was stunned. But, how could the murderer predict that the children would run here in advance? We thought of the idea of using the copper coins temporarily. Only the 3 of us know it. Could it be that one of us? No, it's impossible. Ning-Shu bit her lower lip hard and didn't say anything for a long time. Hui Mo and Tan Siwei, one was Xiahou Qing's most trusted person. He helped her many times. Tan Siwei just risked his life for her. She didn't want to doubt either of them. However, she couldn't answer what was going on. After a short silence, the officers ran over with a piece of black thing and covered their noses. 2 imperial envoys, we found this thing on the shore. Hui Mo frowned as soon as he got close. Why is it so smelly? It smells like burnt meat. He took a deep breath and took 3 steps back. Could it have fallen from those kids? Everyone's face suddenly changed. Their facial features twitched. They couldn't bear to get close to the black thing. The officer who grabbed the meat began to tremble. He didn't know whether to hold it or throw it away. However, Ning Shu was not afraid at all. She walked forward and took the burnt meat in her hand. She even put it on the tip of her nose and sniffed it a few times. She said with certainty, "It's not human flesh. When I learned to investigate a case with my master, I dealt with a burnt corpse case. Although the burnt human flesh is very similar to this one, there are slight differences. Because when a living person is burned, the flesh is burned from wet to dry. The process is cooked first and then burnt. It takes at least 2 hours to completely burn into coke. Obviously, the time just now was not enough. But this piece of meat has been burned from the inside to the outside. Obviously, it doesn't match. Besides, the smell is mixed with a faint smell of grass and wood ash. So, it's better to say that it's not human flesh, but animal skin that has been tanned. But why did this piece of skin appear in the fire? What role did it play in this strange disappearance in the fire? While she was wondering, 2 officers came over with a short and thin old man. The owner of this batch of sacks has been found. It's him. Chapter 578. The old man looked like he was close to 60 years old. Half of his hair was white. When he saw Ning Shu, he began to cry out, "Oh my God, please do me a favor. This fire really wasn't set by this old man. Those children also have nothing to do with me." Ning Shu really didn't have time to listen to his words. She reached out to interrupt him and politely asked, "Old man, did you pile up these sacks here?" The old man's face was sad. Yes, it's like this. This old man originally worked as a bricklayer. I had 2 or 3 apprentices in my hands. I worked in various households in the capital to make a living. Later on, this old man discovered that there are many people in the city who need to repair and expand their residences every year. There is a lot of sand and stone. Although the profit is not much, it is still a profit. Thus, I started this business. This batch of sand and stone was just shipped from Chen Jiang's place yesterday. I thought that I would hire a cart to take it away tomorrow morning. Who knew that this would happen? Dear nobles, even if this old man had 100 guts, this old man still wouldn't dare to commit murder and arson. Ning Shu stood up and clapped her hands. Since it's yesterday's goods, why didn't you take them away today? Instead, you're hoarding them on the shore? Aren't you afraid that someone will steal your goods? The old man's tears were about to fall. Ari, what the hell? Yesterday, when the goods were unloaded, this old man hired a cart driver and made an appointment to take them away today. Who knew that this morning, when the first batch of goods was loaded, the 3 ox carts all broke down. The goods at the docks came and went. It wasn't easy to hire a cart, so I had to leave it here for another day. Thinking about the sand and stone, they were heavy and not very valuable. There were so many valuable things at the docks. Who would be so impulsive as to steal them? Who knows, Ari? If this old man had known, even if this old man had to carry them on his shoulders, he would have carried them all away. Ning Shu nodded her head to express her understanding. But in the next moment, she suddenly turned her head and coldly said, "Then why did you deliberately mix so many bags of wood shavings in these sand and stone?" The old man was stunned. What wood shavings? This old man doesn't know. My 100 bags were filled with sand and stone. How could there be wood shavings? The weight is also wrong. 100 packs. Do you have any witnesses? Of course. At that time, I hired 5 laborists to help me unload the goods, and all of them can testify for me. If you don't believe me, you can ask them one by one. And, after I put these things here, I paid someone to look after it. The old man suddenly remembered to look around. Where's the kid? It must be that kid who didn't take good care of it and let something go wrong. Ning Shu's eyes moved. Her pair of clear black and white eyes on such a dirty face seemed especially sharp and quick-witted. How old is the kid? Is it a boy or a girl? What does he look like? He's about the same height as me. He's a boy, about 13 or 14 years old. He doesn't look clean, like a little beggar. Originally, I didn't want to invite him, but that kid fell to his knees and begged me. He said that his little sister was sick and didn't have money to buy medicine. He begged me to take pity on him. Seeing that he was about the same age as my little grandson, I pitied him. My heart softened for a moment. Who knew that he would cause such a big disaster? Hearing this, Ning Shu's face suddenly tightened. She hurriedly said, I know what's going on. The fire was set by those children themselves. They knew that we would definitely come to find them, so they set up this trap in advance. They broke the ox cart, mixed wood shavings in the sand and stone, and sprinkled good tung oil. Their purpose was to make a big scene in front of us, in front of the hundreds of workers at the docks, and put on a dazzling show. She quickly ran to the shore and said, Did you notice that the area they chose just happened to be at the corner of the docks? No one passed by for a long time, so no one would notice their little tricks. It was precisely because no one passed by and they were the only ones running in this direction in the dark that they attracted our attention the moment they appeared. When they ran into the prearranged circle, they immediately pulled the mechanism to let the sacks fall down and ignited the tung oil. When the fire burned, they put on the animal skins that were soaked in water to prevent fire. They ran and cried in the fire circle to continue to attract our attention. When the fire burned bigger and bigger, and thick smoke rose everywhere, no one would notice that they had put on the animal skins and jumped into the water from the shore. Quick! Immediately call the best person to step on water. Catch those 3 children from the water. Chapter 579. Money was still very useful. With the sound of money, dozens of bare-chested men jumped off the dock like carps who were good at water. Hui Mo looked at his empty purse and thought about the promise that he would be rewarded if he found the children. He felt sorry for himself. It was too miserable. The money he had saved for 10 years was all gone. He also owed a lot of money. If Shizzy didn't reimburse him, he would be a bachelor for the rest of his life. He wiped the tears from the corner of his eyes and said, How do you explain those pieces of wood? Ning Shu stood at the dock and tried her best to look down with the light, but the sky was completely dark. The weak light could not illuminate the deep river below. After such a long time, it was very likely that it would be a waste of effort. She rubbed her aching temples and said, Have you seen puppet shows? Hui Mo nodded, Of course. That's it. In order to escape, the 3 children made several life-sized wooden puppets out of wood and acted in the fire for them. When we saw the puppets being burned in the fire through the thick smoke and fire, we were extremely worried. No one noticed that they had already quietly left the scene. Maybe the 3 children were too smart, or maybe the murderer was more cunning than I thought. He fooled all of us. Ning Shu sighed, I was careless. I knew that the murderer had brainwashed the children and led them to take the initiative to fall into the devil's hands one by one. But I was easily fooled and was disrupted by the sudden fire. Under the illumination of the lights on both sides of the river at night, the river sparkled. Dozens of men who were good at swimming searched the river for hours, but they couldn't find any trace of the children until a witness provided a clue. He said that not long ago, he saw with his own eyes a few children riding a small boat downstream. There was a tall and thin adult man on the boat, wearing black clothes and a bamboo hat. It was too dark to see the man's face clearly. After that, no one caught any trace of them. Hui Mo was so angry that he vomited blood. Damn it. I almost caught that bastard, but he still ran away. I'm so angry. I'm so angry. However, even if he was really angry, it was useless. He sighed and patted his butt as he got up from the ground. He couldn't help but say dejectedly, What should I do next? How are we going to investigate this case? They had encountered so many major cases before, and every case had a troublesome murderer behind it. However, this was the first time they had encountered someone who could play with people's hearts to such an extent. From the beginning to the end, he was like a puppet master hiding behind the scenes. He didn't need to show his face even once. He turned the victims into puppets under his control one by one. He pulled the strings and led the ropes, controlling the children to fight with them, making them hesitate and unable to do anything. Such intelligence, such scheming, simply made one's hair stand on end. Ning Shu raised her head to look at the night sky. People say that the morning glow does not go out and the sunset glow travels thousands of miles. But the strange thing was, even though such a beautiful sunset glow appeared in the west of the capital in the evening, the bright moon above her head was completely covered by a sudden thick cloud. There was not a trace of light. She twisted her sore neck and forced herself to be alert. So far, 5 cases have been completed. The murderer probably won't commit any more cases. What can we do? Let's investigate slowly. By the way, according to the murderer's pattern, there should be a place near here where he has placed the 5th charm. Maybe we can find the last token there. Let's go and find it. We've been running for a whole day without rest. We've eaten 3 simple meals. It's so late now. Why are we still looking for it? Why don't we go back and sleep first, and then? Ning Shu sneered and showed her teeth to him. Sleep. If we can't solve the case, the Empress will punish us. After we die, we have thousands of opportunities to sleep well. I'd rather be a lazy pig in my next life than be a human. Chapter 580. The good news was that before Hui Mo's wish to be reincarnated as a pig in his next life was realized, they found the last black curse and the token in a corner of the dock. Hui Mo picked up the thing and wiped away the black ash on the surface. He was surprised. Oh, a silver ingot. Not only was it a silver ingot, but it was also a piece of burnt silver ingot. The cast seal at the bottom was half melted. Only the words 10 mouths and success could be vaguely seen. He smacked his lips and said, "This should be 50 taels. I've been working with Shizzy for so long, but I only have 100 taels. Those children are beggars. They don't even have enough food to eat. Where did they get so much money? What does it mean to leave it as a token?" Previously, the children had left behind small things like shoes and headbands, which made the token this time stand out even more. Ning Shu looked at the vague words on the silver ingot and frowned. The east was white, and the cool morning wind whistled in her ears. Countless mottled words flashed in the depths of her memory until a beam of white light suddenly appeared in her mind. She snatched the silver ingot. This is dirty silver. The hole in the middle is obviously smaller than 10, so it's not a hole, but a 5. It's the 15th day of the natural selection. Do you remember it now? What? Hui Mo was so shocked that he couldn't close his mouth for a long time. Are you talking about the Hanjiang prefecture that happened 10 years ago? Ning Shu solemnly and slowly nodded. Yes. Hui Mo's face was blank for a moment, and then he recovered from the shock. There was no second person in the capital who knew better than Hui Mo about the terrible famine that happened 10 years ago in the Hanjiang prefecture. In the 14th year of the natural selection, the Hanjiang prefecture suffered a once-in-a-century flood, causing countless fertile fields to be destroyed. The magistrate of the Hanjiang prefecture led the people to fight the flood. Half a month later, the flood receded, and the people suffered heavy losses. Thousands of people were drowned and starved to death. It was not easy for people to survive the hellish winter. In the spring of the next year, they planted new rice and looked forward to new hope. They didn't expect that a bigger disaster was waiting for them. In the 4th month, when the new rice crops were growing like crazy, Hanjiang prefecture did not have a single drop of rain for 3 months in a row. The water in the wells dried up, the newly planted rice died of drought, and the millions of farmland did not have a single grain of harvest. In order to protect his own merits, the Hanjiang prefectural magistrate concealed the disaster and did not report it. As a result, the people in the prefectural magistrate's manor did not have enough to eat. They had to eat dirt to fill their stomachs, and some even had to trade their children for food. It was like purgatory on earth. Today was the sage's 40th birthday. The city was decorated with colorful lanterns, a scene of prosperity and splendor. The red lanterns were bustling. The Imperial Household Department specially cast 200,000 pieces of new silver to congratulate the Empress 1,000 years, engraved with the 8 characters Heaven's Choice 15, Great Success Treasure Celebration, and offered sacrifices to the ancestors. All people celebrate together. Who would have thought that on the eve of the Emperor's birthday, a group of refugees from the Hanjiang prefecture would rush into the capital, thus revealing the truth about the famine? His Majesty was extremely shocked and immediately sent out 6 units to provide disaster relief. He also sent the 100,000 newly minted official silver to the Hanjiang prefecture to solve the urgent situation. But something even more infuriating happened. The 200,000 snowflake silver had just arrived at the Hanjiang treasury, and before they could even spend a single ingot, it all mysteriously disappeared the next morning. At this point, the people were filled with righteous indignation. Riots broke out everywhere, and the Hanjiang prefecture's magistrate committed suicide to avoid punishment. At the time, the prime minister took the initiative to volunteer. First, he pulled out the Hanjiang prefecture's magistrate's corpse, and then executed the entire family to vent the anger of the people. Then, he quickly recovered half of the silver. Finally, he held up his head and kneeled to the heavens. Only then did the flames of disaster, which could have overturned the entire Great U. It wasn't until 2 years later that the aftershocks of the famine barely calmed down. However, the other half of the silver was never found again. A few years later, the case was gradually forgotten with the passage of time, and no one asked where the 100,000 silver was hidden. But strangely, 10 years later, the tainted silver from that year reappeared in the world, and in such a way that shook the entire city. Hui Mo looked at the silver ingot, and for some reason, felt a chill run down his spine. It was as if he had a premonition that the capital would be completely thrown into chaos. Chapter 581. In front of the beef noodle stand, for the first time, Hui Mo didn't know what to eat. Ning Shu followed his gaze and saw the owner of the noodle stand. A couple was leaning against each other. One was responsible for rolling the noodles, the other was responsible for boiling the soup. Next to them was a pot of fragrant braised beef tendon. In the summer in the capital, even in the morning, it was still sultry. The male owner was sweating from rolling the noodles. Before he could open his mouth, the female owner took a cloth towel to wipe his sweat. The two looked at each other and smiled. After a while, they wiped their sweat again and smiled at each other again. There was a small stool in the stall. Their 7 or 8-year-old son was sitting on the stool and reading the 3-character classic carefully. But after all, he was still young. He was taken out of the stall by his parents in the morning. After reading a few pages, he fell asleep. His little head was like a chicken pecking rice on the book. It was so cute that it made the diners laugh. Ning Shu's mouth curved. She withdrew her gaze and said to Hui Mo, "Are you thinking of your parents?" Hui Mo smiled and said, "When they died, they were about the same age." "Ah, no, they had been farming for their whole life. They were tanned and looked older than them. At that time, they were really poor. They rented 3 acres of land from the landlord. They had to work from dawn to dusk every day to feed me. They also saved a little copper coins for me. When I grew up, they sent me to the school to learn how to read. I was really ignorant of the immensity of heaven and earth. I even boasted that when I grew up, I would be the #1 scholar in the capital and become a big official. I would never let them suffer again. As a result, after a year of school, I didn't even know the complete 3-character classic. I was beaten by my father. He almost took me to see a doctor to treat my brain. My mother was soft-hearted. She protected me and said, I didn't give birth to my son to let him repay me in the future. Whether he is smart or stupid, I only want him to have enough food to eat and be safe and happy for the rest of his life. My father was so angry that he scolded a kind mother for wasting her son. Ha 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 ha. He laughed and lowered his eyes to cover the tears inside. It's been 10 years. I almost can't remember what they looked like. I remember when I collected their corpses, their bodies were rotten and smelly, just like the marinated beef in this bowl. Ning Shu let out a long sigh. Just as she was thinking about what to say to comfort him and cheer him up, she suddenly heard the last sentence. The corner of her mouth twitched, and the bowl of beef noodles in her hand suddenly lost its fragrance. Huemo's prank is successful. He raises his head and laughs. Lady Ning, I didn't expect that you would be fooled one day. You can't eat the noodles anymore, right? Chapter 582. Ning Shu thought for a while and said, Where did you find the missing half of the silver? Hui Mo picked up the second bowl and exposed the beef as if it was his enemy. It was hidden in the cellar under the bedboard of the dog official's house. In addition to the silver, there were also the account books of the people's wealth that he had plundered over the years. Every book had his signature. We were eating grass and choking on the soil outside, living a life worse than death. He, on the other hand, was lying on the pile of silver every day. At that time, we just pulled out his body and whipped it. It was too easy for him. By the way, after he died, his family wanted to bribe the guards to escape. They were all caught by the Prime Minister, who came in time and beheaded in public. That was really satisfying. There is such an evil person in the world. He deserved to die. After hearing this, Ning Shu couldn't help but feel disgusted. She saw that the sky was completely bright and there were more and more people on the street. She ate the noodles faster and said, "Well, let's eat quickly. After eating, we still have to investigate the case." Although she didn't know what the silver meant after 10 years, since it appeared, it meant that the case must be closely related to the drought in Hanjiang Prefecture 10 years ago. According to the eyewitness, the man who took the 3 children didn't look like a young man. He was at least 30 years old. 10 years ago, he was in his 20s or 30s. Let's go to the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court to investigate the old case. Maybe we can find some clues according to the pictures. She only hated that she was in a hurry. One day couldn't be divided into 2 days. In this way, she might be able to solve the case earlier and save her mother from the prison. At the same time, she could dig out all the secrets from 25 years ago and save Xiaoho Qing, that bastard. Yes, that bastard, the bastard who had his own ideas and insisted on doing things his own way. By the way, she had to find time to check on Tan Siwei. He had suffered for her. He was hit by so many sandbags and was seriously injured. It was reasonable for her to return the favor. However, it was hard to return the favor. Ning Shu could not help but have a toothache. TSK, Hui Mo nodded. He picked up the second bowl of noodles and gulped it down. He was sweating a lot. He wiped his mouth and said, "The noodles in this restaurant are really good. Even the imperial kitchen in the palace can't compare with them. When I'm not in a hurry next time, I'll definitely come here and eat 8 or 10 bowls. Let's go." The noodle stall owner chuckled as he raised his head and said, "Our little boss's random craftsmanship can't be compared to the delicacies made by the imperial chefs in the imperial palace." "Sir, you flatter me. Boss, you're too humble." Chapter 583. Go. Hui Mo hurriedly climbed into the carriage and waved his whip through the hurried crowd. After chasing for 2 streets, he finally caught up with Ning Shu, who was drenched in sweat. "Lady Ning, get on the carriage. The horse runs faster than you." Ning Shu ran for 2 streets in one breath and was exhausted. Seeing Hui Mo quickly get on the carriage, she sat in the carriage and felt the wind in her ears after the horse accelerated. Her heart, which was out of control for a moment, gradually cooled down and her reason came back little by little. Hui Mo waved the whip high and turned back. "Lady Ning, don't worry. Shi Yang and Juicy are with Shizzy. They won't let anything happen to Shizzy." He frowned and was puzzled, but there are less than 10 people in the world who know that Shizzy was poisoned, and they are all close and trustworthy people. Who leaked this secret? Is it the person who poisoned him? Does she want to do it? Ning Shu closed her eyes and pressed her fingers on the soft couch. She almost broke the embroidered bluegrass pattern. She whispered, "It's not someone else, it's himself." Hui Mo opened his mouth in disbelief. How is it possible? What does Shizzy want to do? Does he want to die? When the news came out that he was poisoned, the shock it brought was enough to be described as earth-shattering. Not only the ambitious people hiding in the dark in the capital would be restless, but what was more terrible was that the Nanping mansion had been guarding Yunyang for many years. Shizzy had led his troops to kill hundreds of thousands of enemies. There were countless enemies in the Jojo. Many people dreamed of cutting off his head. When the hungry hyenas smelled the blood, how could they not be restless and wait for the opportunity to kill him? Ning Shu took a deep breath. The hot sweat she had just run out of gradually cooled down in the wind, sticking to her skin until it reached her heart. After a long time, she said in a trembling voice, "He wants to use himself as bait." As for why he was so anxious to do this, there was only one reason. She didn't dare to say it. She was afraid that the spirits of the past would hear it and make it true. Hui Mo's eyes widened. He was so shocked that he couldn't say a word. Let's go back." He whistled and begged the horse to run faster. After a long silence, Ning Shu suddenly said, "Stop the car. Let's turn back and continue our investigation." Hui Mo was shocked and anxious. "Why?" "We're almost at the prince's mansion, just 3 streets away. Quickly go back and persuade young Master Shizzy. As long as you persuade him, it will definitely work." "He can't do that." Ning Shu's voice was low and deep, like a white plum blossom blooming in the wind and snow. She held on tightly to the flower receptacle to prevent others from seeing the weakness hidden deep in her heart. She said, "Since he has made a decision, no one can persuade him. If he could be easily changed by others, he wouldn't be Xiahou Qing. At the same time, since he had made the decision, he must be confident. Thus, even if he could not persuade him, there was no need for him to do so. Instead of wasting time arguing, why don't we do something more useful?" But Ning Shu shook her head firmly and tasted the blood in her mouth. "No buts. I believe that unless he wants to, he won't let himself die easily. Because he is Xiahou Qing." Hui Mo still had objections, but when he heard her last words, his chest shook silently. "You cry. Ah no, you're right. Who is young Master Shizzy? Those cowards can't touch him. Let's go. Let's solve those cases one by one, and then find the bastard hiding in the ditch who poisoned the people. Let him kneel down and beg for mercy." He raised his sleeve and silently wiped the tears from the corner of his eyes. He pulled the reins and turned the horse around. He shouted "Jiao" and went back the way they came back at the fastest speed. He silently prayed 10,000 times that young Master Shizzy must be safe. He must be safe. On the carriage, Ning Shu lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked at the majestic and familiar mansion. The highest building had curved eaves, and the green glazed tiles reflected a beautiful light under the sunlight. It jumped into her eyes, and also illuminated the water on her long eyelashes. Her pink nails deeply embedded in the soft flesh of her palms. She said in her heart as if she couldn't feel the pain, "Don't die, Xiahou Qing, listen to me, you can't die. If you dare to die before I see you again, I will hate you in this life, the next life, and the next life until the end of time." Chapter 584. Shizzy Yi. After finishing off the last assassin, Ju Sai sheathed his sword and immediately rushed back to Xiahou Qing's side to check on his injuries. Since the news of Xiahou Qing being poisoned had been made public yesterday, 3 waves of assassins had attacked in one night. The first 2 waves could only be considered small skirmishes. They didn't even touch the inner sect of the prince's manor and had already been cleaned up. After investigation, they were all spies that the enemy of the northern region had planted in the capital, so there was nothing to worry about. Only the 3rd wave, which suddenly broke out between night and morning, was fierce. They had sent the most elite men of sacrifice. Most of Xiahou Qing's shadow guards had been sent to Ning Shu's side. For a moment, these men of sacrifice had charged into the unknown hall and allowed an arrow to cut through Xiahou Qing's neck. "Shizzy Yi." Ju Sai frowned and called out twice before getting a response from Xiahou Qing. "What? Have the assassins been cleaned up?" Ju Sai looked at his blood-soaked neck and couldn't stop his throat from choking. "Your ear." In the past, even if he was in front of thousands of soldiers and horses, Shizzy Yi wouldn't let a single arrow near him. But when the arrow had been shot, he had clearly hesitated. It wasn't until the arrow had scraped the skin on his neck that he had barely dodged it. He didn't even feel the pain of his bleeding. This meant that not only his hearing, but even his sense of touch was slowly deteriorating. Xiahou Qing reached out and touched the side of his neck. Only when he felt the smooth touch of his fingertips did he know that he was injured. He didn't care and took the white silk handkerchief that Ju Sai handed to him. He casually wiped it and threw it to the side. "No harm. It's just a small injury." Go and bring the medicine that Master Duan left behind before he left. Ju Sai and Shi Yang were both shocked. Ju Sai immediately tried to dissuade him. Before Mr. Duan left, he specifically told me that although this medicine can forcefully amplify your hearing and touch, the consequence is that every time the poison acts up, the extreme pain you have to endure will be magnified by 10 times or 100 times. Not only that, this medicine itself is another kind of poison. After taking it, it will entangle with the plum blossom kiss. Not only will it not cancel each other out, but it will also accelerate the corrosion of your internal organs. Unless it is absolutely necessary, you must not take it out. Around them was a battlefield that hadn't been cleaned up yet. Pools of blood formed a river, completely destroying the elegance of the unknown hall. Xiahou Qing sat diagonally in front of the small table where Ning Shu used to copy as punishment. Bathing in the pale morning sun, half of his sky-blue unlined clothes had been soaked in blood. He was as beautiful as a fragile porcelain. Chapter 585. Imperial Palace, Luanyun Pavilion. After a night of patrolling, Xiao Yuni took off his scarlet cloak and asked, "How's the situation?" Fei Luan, who was wearing a mask, bent her knees and took the cloak with both hands. She reported in a low voice, "As you expected, the fourth prince did take action. Just 2 hours ago, his second butler led a group of men of sacrifice to attack the Duke of Nanping's estate. The butler shot Xiahou Qing with an arrow, but it was not serious and only a flesh wound. The men of sacrifice were all killed. The Duke of Nanping recognized Qi Rui and should be targeting the fourth prince's estate now." Xiao Yuni was dressed in silver armor that was spotless. His chiseled face was like the armor on his body. In the capital, which was like a steamer, he was cold-blooded and heartless, without a trace of warmth. Since he killed the deposed concubine Jiang without blinking and cut off her head and hung it at the Meridian Gate as a warning, the sixth prince, Xiao Yuni, became a demon-like existence in the eyes of all the palace servants. They could not help trembling when they saw him. He laughed coldly and walked to the window. This was one of the highest pavilions in the imperial palace. Since the emperor was seriously ill and he took over the power of Cao Hu to guard the imperial palace, he chose this place as his bedroom. As long as he stood in front of this window and looked down, the entire imperial palace seemed to be under his feet and he did not need to bend his knees to anyone. He curled his lips and looked around coldly. "I did not expect Xiao Yunsu and Xiahou Qing to be able to injure each other, but I did not expect them to be defeated so easily. He is indeed a complete idiot. The fourth prince is indeed extremely stupid. He sent assassins but they did not kill anyone. Instead, they were caught. Such a mediocre person actually wants to fight for the throne with you. It's ridiculous." Fei Luan obediently poured hot water and took a hot towel to Xiao Yuni's hand. She said according to his wishes, but no matter what, he at least brought some trouble to the Duke of Nanping's estate. "When the snipe and the clam fight, one must die. For your highness, it saves you the trouble of taking action. Let's just watch from the sidelines. But I'm very curious. The fourth prince and Xiahou Qing did not have any deep hatred before. The biggest conflict was when they sent off the Southern Yang envoy and argued at the state banquet. Why would he take such a risk?" Xiao Yuni glanced at her and said calmly, "It's nothing. I just told him a secret through some method, a secret that made him desperate and kill me. Do you want to know what the secret is?" Fei Luan looked up curiously. But suddenly, she met with Xiao Yuni's dark brown eyes. Those eyes were locked on her like a sword, as if he was going to stab her into the wall behind her any time. He bowed slightly and looked down. "You want to steal this secret from my mouth and then tell it to Yin Jiaoyi, who I should call mother, right?" Fei Luan's face turned pale as if she had been dismembered by 1,000 cuts. She subconsciously wanted to deny it and explain that she had only asked out of curiosity. It had nothing to do with anyone else and that she would only ever be loyal to him. But under his frightening gaze, any explanation she had would be useless at this moment. The flood dragon raised his claws, ready to crush the trembling little beast under his claws. He grabbed her chin and took off the mask on her face. Looking at her familiar face, there was admiration, disdain, infatuation, and disdain in his eyes. Do you think your clumsy cover can really hide it from me? With such a similar face and a carefully arranged encounter, do you think you can make me completely let down my guard against you? Before you swore to be loyal to me with your life, I had already investigated your background. Chapter 586. Kicking Fail One to the wall, Xiao Yuni sneered coldly, my weak and low-key biological mother, who doesn't even dare to breathe loudly, really put in a lot of effort. She's even willing to use her own son as a tool to climb up the social ladder. Fail One was so frightened that her face turned pale. She didn't bother to wipe the blood from the corner of her mouth and crawled up like a dog to kneel by his feet, trembling. Xiao Yuni stepped back and sat on the armchair by the window. He picked up a pot of wine and drank it in one gulp. When I was young, I only thought that she was a timid mother. She didn't have a prominent background, didn't have the support of her maternal family and didn't have father's love, so it was inevitable that she was in dire straits in the palace and could only bow her head to everyone. Every time she saw her say something wrong, or break a cup, or even just a displeased look, she would tremble and kneel down in front of the concubines of a higher rank than her, or even the beauties of the Jiaoyi palace of the same rank. As for me, I stood behind her and looked at her humble figure with anger and pity. As for me, an unfavored prince who grew up in her lap, I received criticism from all directions as if it was only natural that I would be framed. It was even common for Imperial Brother and the others to vent their anger on me when they were unhappy. And all she could do was to use a handkerchief to wipe her tears over and over again, bending down to beg for mercy in front of her mother. Later on, it happened so many times that she didn't even dare to cry anymore. She could only hide in her bedroom silently and cover her ears and eyes. I thought that she was just a woman with a weak personality. Just like all the living beings in the world, there are those who are strong and those who are weak. There are those who are ferocious like tigresses, protecting their children firmly in their bellies. No matter who comes, they will risk their lives to protect them. There are also those like her, who can't even protect herself and is always wronged, so how can she protect me? I was angry at her for not fighting for herself and hated myself for being born in her womb, but later on, I let it go. It's not that she didn't want to protect me, but she didn't have the ability. Then, when I grow up, when I have the ability to hold up the world for her. Xiao Yuni swallowed the last mouthful of wine, a cold smile appearing on his lips. A few years later, I found out that it was just a joke. The wine pot fell to the ground and turned into powder. He lifted her chin with his toes and narrowed his red eyes. Tell me, why did she send you here? If you dare to lie, I can spare your face, but that doesn't mean I will spare your life. After listening to his monologue, Fail One's entire body was immersed in a huge tremor. She spent several months thinking that she had grasped this side of him, but she didn't expect that it was all an illusion. The self-righteous snake catcher finally stepped into the snake's trap. This servant was indeed chosen by Zhao Yi Niang to be by your side, but this servant's devotion to your highness can be witnessed by the sun and moon. From the moment this servant saw your highness, there was no room for a second man in my eyes. Fail One raised her head, her eyes brimming with hot tears falling down like pearls on her face, delicate and pitiful. And when Zhao Yi Niang sent this servant, she never had any intention of harming your highness. Ever since she started her plan many years ago, her goal was to help your highness ascend to the throne. This has never changed. As for why she chose this servant, it's because your favoritism towards Lady Ning is too much, and it will harm you. Therefore, for your sake, Zhao Niang could only choose this servant, hoping that this servant would be able to share a little bit of affection from her and let you calm down. She sent this servant to inquire about the news only so that you and your son can be a little closer. Chapter 587. Before Fail One could finish, her throat was almost broken by Xiao Yuni's kick. For me. Xiao Yuni was extremely sarcastic. What a dignified reason. She has said all the good and bad things in the world. Does she still think that I'm that stupid boy who was blinded by her and manipulated by her without knowing anything? She only wants power, prestige, the worship of the entire palace and the respect of the people. She can't get it with her own ability, so she manipulated me to fight for the position of empress for her. In order to realize her ambition, she played me in the palm of her hand for 20 years. Now she still wants to play the emotional card with me and whitewash the relationship between mother and son? Ridiculous. He grabbed her neck and said in a low voice, "Go back and tell her 2 things. First, I want to know what secrets Shu and the Duke family have and why she is targeting Shu. Secondly, I don't care what she wants, as long as it doesn't get in my way." Seeing that half of her blood flows in my veins, I can reluctantly turn a blind eye to those things. But there are 2 things that I will never allow her to touch. The first is my throne, and the second is Ning Shu. If she dares to touch these 2, in the past 10 years, it's equivalent to me not having a mother, then in the future, I can also completely not have one. The feeling of suffocation made Fail Wan's vision turn black. Just when she thought that her life was going to end here today, the grip on her neck finally loosened. She lay on the ground like mud, her teeth chattering uncontrollably as she crawled out of the majestic bedroom step by step. Yes, this servant will tell the truth to Her Highness Jowie. This servant will leave. This servant will leave. When the open door was closed again, this place, one of the highest pavilions in the palace, became quiet again, so quiet that only Xiao Yunyi's heavy breathing could be heard. The wind from above blew on his body, bringing with it the unique heat of summer, but it did not warm his heart. He stood up again and walked back to the window, looking down at the palace ridges that were connected together, golden and green. In this world, what else can belong to me? His dark brown eyes were as deep as a lake under the reflection of the glazed tiles. Since there isn't, then I want the throne and you. In that case, I can only kill Xiahou Qing. Ning Shu woke up with a start from a headache. He found that the carriage had stopped outside the imperial mausoleum. The files she borrowed from the Ministry of Justice fell to the ground at her feet. They detailed the case of the Hanjiang magistrate's corruption and the starvation of tens of thousands of people 10 years ago. She took these files out of the Ministry of Justice and rushed to the imperial mausoleum without stopping. After reading half of it, she finally couldn't take it anymore and fainted. In her dream, she dreamed that Xiahou Qing was ambushed and killed by an assassin. Before he died, he seemed to be smiling as he called out her name. When she woke up, her entire body was soaked in sweat. Her eyes slowly regained focus. She quickly pinched herself and repeatedly told herself that it was just a nightmare. Dreams and reality were often the opposite. What she was afraid of would never happen, definitely not. It takes her a short time to convince herself. She opens the bamboo curtain and finds that Hui Mo is also resting on the wooden board with his hands on his chest. Everyone was exhausted from running for their lives, but no one could do anything about it. After all, they were all fighting for their lives with the King of Hell. Ning Shu wanted to let him rest for a while, and she could go in and ask him herself. She didn't expect that as soon as she moved, Hui Mo would wake up. "You're awake. We're here." The Imperial Mausoleum is the place where the Demon Empress monument was found. Let's go in. Chapter 588. Ning Shu said apologetically, "You can sleep for a while more. There are so many guards here. I'll be fine. I'll come out after asking a few questions." Hui Mo rubbed his eyes and patted his chest. "Let a weak woman like you investigate the case alone. Young Miss Ning, you're looking down on me too much. When we fought with Shizzy, we didn't sleep for 3 days and 3 nights in order to prevent the enemy's sneak attack. We still beat the hell out of the war hounds. How long has it been? My stamina is very strong." Ning Shu was about to be moved to tears, but she couldn't stop her mouth from twitching. Who taught you to say that?" Hui Mo blinked his big innocent eyes. "Shi Yang. He told me that if I say these words in front of the girls, they will definitely look at me with admiration." Ning Shu patted his shoulder sympathetically and sincerely suggested, "Well, it's different. The girls will be happy to give you a pair with their fists. Silly boy, some brothers don't need. Well, if you're not sleepy, come in with me. Take the token." Hui Mo followed behind in confusion and asked, "What do you mean? Did I say something wrong? Tell me clearly, I really don't understand." Because of the sudden appearance of the Demon Empress stone tablet and the Blood Lotus book, the mausoleum was heavily guarded. They couldn't enter even if they took out the token of the Nanping mansion. Until someone came with Empress Cao's order, they were let in. And this timely help was none other than Xiao Yuni, whom she hadn't seen for a long time. "Greetings, Your Highness." Xiao Yuni waved his hand at the guards expressionlessly and ordered them to leave. When he turned back to look at Ning Shu, his eyes were full of warmth, just like when he was young. He didn't say anything, but his eyes were shining. He lowered his head, his eyes filled with a longing that had been suppressed to the extreme. "Shu, long time no see." Ning Shu thought that they had already made things clear, both sides shaking hands and making peace, but in the face of such a sincere gaze, she couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Fortunately, she still had to hide the fact that she had recovered her memory, so she pretended to be at a loss and blinked her eyes, respectfully bowing her head and saying, "Does this subject know Your Highness?" "Please forgive me, Your Highness. This subject's daughter contracted a serious illness a few days ago and has yet to remember many things. However, I still have to thank Your Highness for taking the trouble to bring me a handwritten order and helping me investigate the case." The mist in Xiao Yuni's eyes fluttered as he kept away those heavy and suppressed emotions. When he smiled again, he was back to normal. "That's right, you're sick. There have been many things happening in the palace recently and I forgot about it. How has your body recovered? It's been hard on you to let you work on the case as soon as you returned to the capital." Ning Shu thought that he would leave after sending the handwritten order, but she didn't expect him to lift his robe and enter the mausoleum with her. She immediately felt a headache and could only continue to walk forward. "Thank you for Your Highness' understanding. It's my duty to be able to work for the Empress. This subject's daughter is flattered by Your Highness' kindness." This unfamiliar tone made Xiao Yuni laugh. "You wouldn't talk to me like this in the past. I remember that the last time I didn't see you for so long was when I was 18 years old and took father's task to Hailong province for the first time. Because the task was urgent, he immediately urged me to get on the horse after leaving the court and didn't even have time to tell you in advance. I was afraid that you would be angry with me, so I slept at most 4 hours a day on the day of the task. I wanted to finish the task as soon as possible and return to the capital to apologize to you, but I didn't expect that it was still too late when I rushed back. You were so angry that you kicked me as soon as we met and then didn't give me a good face for half a month. You were completely unlike now, respectful, polite, and distant, like there was a thick layer of paper between us. It seems like you've really forgotten about me completely." Chapter 589. Those past memories that were as bright as the morning sun had only been with him for 2 to 3 years. Every night when he was tossing and turning, he would sleep on them like he was drinking poison to quench his thirst. But to her, it had been 300 years. Even if she bent down by the lake to reach for the flower at the bottom of the lake, it was just a distant shadow and could no longer stir up the waves in her heart. Ning Shu pursed her lips silently and said meaningfully, "Something like that actually happened. I was too presumptuous. At that time, I was still too young, so I was mischievous when I did things. Your Highness, please don't be calculative with me. Now that we've both grown up, many things have changed. Just like how Your Highness must have gone through many hardships to become so calm and mature like a dragon now." Xiao Yuni looked up at the dazzling sun at the top of the sky, his expression full of self-mockery. "Yes, everything has changed. You've changed, I've changed too. The only thing that doesn't change in this world is that whether you want to or not, you're constantly changing, becoming another version of yourself. You're so unfamiliar that you're unrecognizable." They were no longer as close as they used to be. Ning Shu could not respond to such a topic. She could only quietly lower her head and walk with him in silence. Xiao Yuni suddenly stopped and said, "Speaking of which, you promised to treat me to a meal before, but you forgot. I've really suffered a big loss." Ning Shu stopped and was so embarrassed that she did not know how to respond. Looking at her hesitant expression, Xiao Yuni laughed happily for the first time in many days. Don't worry, I won't eat you up. We've known each other for 12 years and this is the first time I'm investigating a case with you. I have to experience it. She did not know if she was too sensitive or something else, but she felt that the current Xiao Yuni was a completely different person compared to before. It was as if it was only yesterday that the young prince who came to her door to denounce her for wearing 3 sets of wedding clothes had suddenly changed. This person had already changed without her noticing. His speech and actions were as deep as the sea, and he was able to control his emotions freely. Those dark brown eyes were clearly smiling, but when she looked into them, she felt very oppressed. He was even scarier than he was in his first life. Why? What had happened in this life that caused him to become like this? Ning Shu secretly clenched her fists and tried to restrain the fear in her heart. She still pretended to be oblivious to the fact that she had lost her memory. She smiled warmly and said, "Since your highness has given the order, I dare not disobey it." The construction of the imperial mausoleum started when the late emperor ascended the throne and was still incomplete when he died. It took 35 years. The scale of the project, the grandeur of the project, and the amount of money spent in the national treasury was enough to leave a thick stroke in the history books of Great Yu. It had to be said that the previous emperor's love for her had reached the pinnacle. The entire imperial mausoleum covered an area of more than 100 hectares. 13 days ago, it suddenly collapsed, and the Calamity Monument appeared in the northwest corner of the imperial mausoleum. Yesterday, she spent the whole day chasing after those children. Except for the old silver ingot and the black curse that implied the kiss of plum blossoms, she found nothing. She could only put her hope in the place where she found the stone tablet, which was also the source of the case. After that incident, the ominous monument with the words Calamity Demon Empress written on it was quickly transported into the imperial palace. It was strictly guarded and could not be seen. Only the collapsed area was left to be investigated, so no one dared to touch it. Under the guidance of the mausoleum guards, Ning Shu and the others quickly found their destination. That stone tablet was found here. The guard in charge of patrolling that day was also pulled over. He honestly narrated the details, not even daring to raise his head. Because of this sudden incident, he was so scared that he could not eat or sleep peacefully for 10 days. His little face was deathly pale. According to the usual practice, in order to prevent daring thieves from disturbing the previous emperor's peace, the imperial mausoleum was divided into 3 rounds every day: morning, noon, and night. The entire imperial mausoleum was divided into 16 sections, with 4 people in charge of each section. On the day of the incident, it was indeed a servant's job. This servant clearly remembers that during that period of time, it was raining heavily every day. It was so heavy that the entire capital seemed to be soaked in water. However, as the imperial mausoleum's guards, this servant remembered their duties and did not dare to slack off in the slightest. Only after earnestly completing the morning patrol did this servant dare to hide in the corridor to avoid the rain. Because our bodies were soaked, the brothers were not happy. We agreed to change into dry clothes together, but because I was in a hurry to relieve myself, I went to the latrine alone with an umbrella. Before I entered the latrine, I suddenly heard a loud rumble from the northwest corner, as if something had collapsed. This servant was shocked and ran into the rain without holding the umbrella. This was the scene I saw. This servant knew that the collapse of the imperial mausoleum was a great omen. If the rainwater leaked into the underground palace and damaged the previous emperor's dragon body, even if this servant had 10,000 heads, we would not be able to shoulder the responsibility. As a result, this servant hurriedly called for people to repair it. However, just as a few bricks were picked up, a corner of a monolith appeared in the sand. This servant was curious and went forward to take a look. Who knew that after the sand and stones were cleaned up, they would see those 4 words. "I beg your highness to spare my life." Although this thing was discovered by this servant, but even if this servant had 10 dog lives, this servant would not dare to tamper with this matter. Chapter 590. The young guard was only in his teens. He was crying as he spoke, and he looked pitiful with snot bubbles coming out of his nose. In addition, this child had a young and tender face, with soft and tender skin, which made Ning-Shu look disgusting, as if she had bullied him. Ning-Shu hurriedly said, "Don't cry, don't cry. No one said that you did it. Answer me a few questions first. You said that you just finished patrolling in the morning. Then did you find any signs of the bricks loosening?" The young guard sniffled and said uncertainly, "No, no. The rain was too heavy that day, and I couldn't see the road clearly. When we patrolled, we were mainly looking for thieves who dared to sneak in. We really didn't notice that the bricks were loose. Then a few days before the accident, did you find any thieves or other suspicious people wandering around?" The young guard shook his head timidly. "No." Ning-Shu frowned and thought to herself, "That's strange. Before I came here, I went to the Ministry of Works to borrow the books about the Emperor's mausoleum. It recorded that when the mausoleum was built, it took a total of 80,000 workers in 35 years. The left and right assistant ministers of the Ministry of Works supervised the construction personally. They selected the best craftsmen in the country and used the best bricks and wood. Now it has only been 20 years since the completion of the mausoleum. How could it collapse like this after a few rainstorms? Brother Huimo, please go and take a look at the exposed layer of soil where the stone tablet was dug out. Is it new or old? Is there any trace of it being dug out?" Huimo's eyes lit up and he rubbed his palms. "Great. Digging up dirt and digging up corpses is my specialty. I just learned a new way to determine the age of the buried corpse from a book. Hehe, it's a good opportunity to try it." Ning-Shu also stood aside and observed the traces of the collapsed bricks. Xiao Yuni went forward in confusion. "Do you think it's man-made?" Ning-Shu didn't even think about it. Her clear eyes stared at the broken parts of the bricks and she knocked them one by one. Of course, if there are ghosts in this world, then the late emperor could have reprimanded the person who brought disaster to the country. Why would he use such a roundabout and troublesome trick? If the late emperor really had the eye of the heavens and could sense what would happen after his death and make a prophecy 25 years in advance, then the current chaos in the palace wouldn't have happened. But to transport such a large stone tablet into the imperial mausoleum without anyone noticing, dig 3 feet into the ground and bury it, and then make it collapse and expose at the right time, not only do we have to avoid hundreds of pairs of eyes inside and outside the mausoleum, we also have to talk about many traps and mechanisms. If we accidentally touch it, we will be pierced by thousands of arrows. I really don't believe that anyone in 9 regions has such an ability. Xiao Yuni furrowed his straight eyebrows, a small knot forming between his eyebrows. He was handsome to begin with, and now that he was deep in thought, the unfathomable shrewdness he had just now disappeared temporarily, showing a trace of pure kindness. Unfortunately, the person he met was Ning-Shu, whose heart was as firm as a rock. She didn't even turn her head and said, "There's always a way. It's just that we haven't thought of it yet. I don't believe in the so-called supernatural forces and gods. The most terrifying thing in the world is not the dead, but the human heart. At the same time, the most omnipotent thing is often the human heart." She turned over the bricks one by one, but didn't find any traces of gunpowder. She wasn't discouraged and clapped her hands as she stood up and said, "Where was the blood lotus letter and the child's broken finger found? Take me to see it." The eunuch leading the way raised his finger and said, "It's over there. Noble ladies, please follow this servant to see it." It was like this that day. After the imperial mausoleum collapsed, the demon Steely appeared. This servant was so frightened that his soul almost left his body. He didn't even dare to touch it and hurriedly reported the news to the palace. His Majesty was furious and immediately sent the 108 monks of the Xianghua Temple to the imperial mausoleum to expel the evil and seal the demon Steely. That ceremony was extremely grand. Within 300 steps of the demon Steely, magical instruments were placed on every side. The eminent monks used their hands to form seals and set up arrays, chanting the exorcism incantation. The servants all watched from the side, and no one dared to make a sound. That ceremony went from day to night, and then to day again. It went on for an entire day and night. The sky was clear and bright, and the sun was shining brightly. Just as it was about to end, a bright yellow silk appeared in the sky. It was bright red, and it slowly floated towards the execution ground. Seeing this, the abbot of the Xianghua temple, Great Master Ju Ming, immediately reached out to grab the silk. After unfolding it, he recognized the blood lotus drawn on it, as well as the 8 treasonous words written in the center of the lotus. This happened right before our eyes. Everyone can testify. Chapter 591. Ning Shu repeatedly confirmed, "Are you sure that other than the eminent monk, there are only your people around, and you did not see anyone suspicious?" The eunuch pointed to the sky and swore, "This servant dares to guarantee with my life." Because of what happened to the stone tablet the day before, everyone was scared. Everyone was alert and vigilant, afraid that there would be another accident during the ritual. If that happened, it would be hard for us to absolve ourselves from the blame. But who would have thought that even though we were tightly guarded, something still went wrong in the end? He knelt on the ground and begged Ning Shu with tears in his eyes, "This servant begs the noble one to find out the truth and save our lives. Otherwise, all of us here will die to atone for our sins." Behind him, rows of guards and eunuchs knelt down one after another. Every pair of eyes was filled with despair. Faced with so many eager gazes, Ning Shu's heart surged and her throat tightened. She took a deep breath and helped the eunuch up. "Everyone, please rise. I promise you that I will do my best." "Eunuch, where was the severed finger found? Was it also here?" The eunuch rolled up his sleeves and wiped his tears. He led Ning Shu to an inch-long white circle. "It's here." "It also suddenly fell from the sky." The eunuch nodded. He still remembered the horror of that day. Yes. Just the day before yesterday, the demon monument and the blood lotus inscription happened one after another. We lit up hundreds of lanterns around here and kept watch day and night, afraid that there would be more demons. But what we feared really happened. That morning, more than 10 of us were squatting here, not daring to blink. Suddenly, we heard the sound of something falling from the sky. The sound was not loud, so we thought we heard wrong. In the end, when we looked carefully, we saw something extra on the ground. It was a severed finger. It was only an inch long, bloody, rotten, and smelly. At first glance, we knew it was a child's finger. We thought of the recent cases of children losing their lives in the capital and guessed what had happened. Ning Shu nodded. She had seen the severed finger in the Supreme Judiciary's freezer yesterday. It was indeed an inch long, as thin and soft as a willow branch that had just sprouted in spring. It made people unable to bear to look at it and turn their heads away. "Do you still remember the time?" 7 o'clock just passed. "What about the day of the blood lotus letter?" "That day, the ceremony was rather loud, so I didn't notice." The eunuch turned his head and asked the others, "Did you notice?" Everyone shook their heads and said that they had watched the eminent monks perform the ritual for an entire day and night. It was a blur and no one had bothered to ask about the time. Only a young imperial bodyguard raised his hand and said, "I know, it's also 7 in the morning." I stood outside and heard the bell from the bell tower. Not long after the bell rang, I heard everyone shouting that something was floating down from the sky. "Hey, that's amazing. This murderer had too many strange habits. Every 3 days, he would commit a crime. Every time he dropped something, he would pick the right time. What was wrong with him? Do you have obsessive-compulsive disorder?" Hui Mo came over with a handkerchief and wiped the mud off his hand. Ning Shu looked back at him and asked, "Is there a result?" "Of course. I'm better than 2 people." Hui Mo patted his chest and boasted shamelessly. He bent down and blinked his eyes mysteriously. "Guess what the result is? Has anyone dug the soil? Can you guess? Can you guess? If you can't guess, then I'll be merciful and tell you. That soil is old. There is no trace of moss in it. I tested it with the juice of the purple gold grass. I'm afraid that the soil hasn't seen the sun for nearly 10 years. This means that the stone tablet was not buried recently. Just like the soil, it has been there for many years." Chapter 592. After a short moment of shock, Ning Shu's eyes suddenly lit up. She immediately asked the eunuch, "Eunuch, may I ask if this mausoleum has been repaired since it was built? How many times? What year, month, and day? Where did the craftsman come from? Do you have a specific list?" A series of questions. The eunuch didn't have the strength to resist at all. He didn't know which one to answer. Ning Shu simply said, "The imperial mausoleum's renovation is different from others. There must be a detailed record book. Please show it to me." There is. There is a record in the Ministry of Works, and we also have one here. This slave will go and get it. Please wait for a moment. This slave will come back quickly. The eunuch hurriedly ran away while holding his robe. He said that he would come back soon. Sure enough, in less than half an hour, he trotted back with a thick book and put it in front of Ning Shu. Ning Shu didn't even think about it. She spread the book on the stone bench next to her and quickly flipped through it. Hui Mo also didn't hesitate and stepped forward to help. Xiao Yuni said, "Do you think that someone set up this trap in advance many years ago to deal with Imperial Mother?" Ning Shu's eyes were as bright as stars. She searched for the bead in the vast sea of words in front of her. This is the only explanation. As you said, this stone tablet is big and heavy. It is difficult to sneak it in without so many eyes. So there are only 3 possibilities. First, all the guards inside and outside the Imperial Mausoleum worked together to set up all of this. This is obviously unlikely. In addition, Hui Mo just testified that this tombstone has been buried for many years. So this guess can be ruled out. Second, the guard who discovered this stone tablet has a problem. At that time, the bricks collapsed and the sand sank deep, revealing a corner of the stone tablet. It's true that the stone tablet was originally buried underground, but don't forget that at that time, only the little guard was present. As long as he wanted to, he could have taken advantage of the fact that there was no one around to carve that rebellious sentence on the empty stone tablet. Then, he could have quickly covered it with sand and mud and called for his companions in a panic. Finally, under their eyes, he could have pretended to accidentally dig out the stone tablet. The little guard knelt on the ground as if he was struck by lightning. He shook his head and swore, almost bursting into tears again. Ning Shu hurriedly comforted her, "Don't be afraid, this is just one of our guesses. Whether or not you did it, we'll know once we check your recent whereabouts. Don't worry, we won't frame a good person, and we won't drag someone else in to take the blame. I haven't mentioned the 3rd possibility yet. Don't faint, please don't faint." Flower took a few deep breaths and held back her tears under Ning Shu's fearful gaze. Ning Shu exhaled and continued reading. "The 3rd possibility is what I'm doing now. If it's not a thief or a guard of the mausoleum, then there's only one kind of person who can do this, and that's the craftsman of the mausoleum. No one was more proficient in the art of subterfuge than them, and no one was more legitimate and less suspicious than them. Found it. It's here, look. The mausoleum of the late emperor has been renovated twice in the past 2 years. The first time was in the 9th year of Tianzi, which was the 60th birthday of the late emperor. To show filial piety, His Majesty ordered the craftsmen to strengthen the mausoleum. They built 8 stone statues of mythical beasts to protect the late emperor. The second time was at the end of the 15th year of Tianzi. Ning Shu raised her head and looked at Hui Mo. Both of their eyes were filled with amazement. Ning Shu continued, "The drought in the Hanjiang prefecture caused the people to lose their homes. His Majesty was in great pain and sorrow. He personally went to Xianghua Temple to chant sutras and pray. He also ordered all the ancestral mausoleums to be renovated in order to bless the great Yu, the people, and the Xiao family. Naturally, this mausoleum of the late emperor was included. Because there were many mausoleums to be renovated, the number of craftsmen assigned to each mausoleum was inevitably reduced. There were a total of 239 craftsmen recorded in the book, and they are all listed here." Ning Shu's white fingertips went through the 239 names, as well as the age, place of origin, and family background that were recorded in detail behind the names, one by one, trying to find some suspicious points. However, Even though the number of names on this list was only a drop in the ocean compared to the vast number of 80,000 craftsmen who built the mausoleum, it was still difficult to pinpoint the problematic one in such a short period of time. It was as difficult as finding a needle in a haystack. At this time, she couldn't help but envy Xiahou Qing's perverted ability to remember everything he heard. It was a pity that he wasn't by her side now. Not here. The softest part of her heart seemed to have been torn open. When the wind blew, it hurt so much that she couldn't straighten her back. She pinched the web between her thumb and index finger to make herself not think about him for the time being, so that she could maintain the highest level of consciousness. She calmed down and carefully looked through the list in front of her. Hui Mo and Xiao Yuni also came to help. Very quickly, the Imperial Mausoleum became quiet again, leaving only the sound of pages turning. As Xiao Yuni searched, he continued to ask Ning Shu, if it's as you guessed, it's one of these craftsmen, then what I don't understand is, since he had already set it up many years ago, why did he wait until now to make trouble for Mother? Ning Shu said, maybe the time was not right at that time, and the other party knew that he couldn't compete with the Empress, so he didn't make a move and waited for the right time. Or maybe after he set up the stone tablet, he didn't wait for the second step and met with an accident, so he waited for several years. Or maybe, he couldn't do it on his own and had already given up, but someone suddenly reached out to help him. All kinds of encounters in the world are always full of opportunities and good fortune. Without the final decryption, no one can detect every detail. As the two were discussing in a low voice, on the other side, when he saw one of the names, Hui Mo blinked and suddenly said, "Eh? Why does this name seem a little familiar? Where have I heard it before?" Ning Shu looked over and asked, "Which one?" Hui Mo casually pointed at the name of a person called Enchanting and said, "Well, it's this one. TSK, this name is quite elegant. At first glance, he doesn't look like a craftsman, but more like a scholar." Ning Shu's pupils constricted, her eyes full of surprise. He might be a scholar. Do you still remember Master Yuan of Aoshuang Academy? What, it's him? Chapter 593. In Aoshuang Academy, under the lush and gloomy locust tree, a dozen or so little students all straightened their backs and sat upright on simple praying mats. They shrunk their necks and didn't dare to make a sound. A skinny little mud monkey stood outside the door and tried to push the door a few times. When he found that the door was locked, he quickly turned around and jumped in through the half-collapsed mud wall. He quickly sat beside a fat boy and gently pushed him. "Did the teacher drink today?" The little fat boy timidly said, "I don't think so. He just went into the room to get a book and a ruler. He said that today he was going to talk about a person called Wu Shusha in the records of the Grand Historian." The little mud monkey dusted off the wall and disdainfully said, "Idiot, that was Wu's issue. Last time the teacher was drunk under the locust tree, I went over and peeped. Oh no, if he didn't drink, he will check his homework today. I'm finished." The little fat boy opened his eyes wide and said in horror, "Ah, what homework? Why don't I know? I'm finished. I didn't write anything. Woo, I don't want to be hit in the palm. I want to go home." The little fat boy cried and wanted to run away. With a bang, he bumped into someone. The little mud monkey's face was too horrible to look at. All the other children were scared into silence. Yuan Wanting sneered condescendingly. The little fat boy trembled and was so scared that he peed. Yuan Wanting looked at his wet feet and was so angry that he blew his beard and glared. He kicked the little fat boy to the side. The little fat boy was saved. He rubbed his but that did not hurt and quickly rolled to the side so that he would not be an eyesore to the teacher. Yuan Wanting threw the ruler on the wooden stool and said in a strange tone, "You didn't do your homework?" The group of little mud monkeys shrank into quails. No one dared to speak. Yuan Wanting lazily sat on the stone bench. "If you didn't do it, then don't do it. Anyway, I don't have time to criticize you. Little brats, perk up your ears and listen to me attentively. Wu Zishu was a member of the Chu dynasty. His father was called Wu Shi, and his brother was called Wu Shong. His name was Wu Ju, and he was famous for his straightforward advice to King Zhuang of Chu. Therefore, he became famous in Chu. Under the locust tree, Enchanting was reciting his scriptures half-dead. The little mud monkeys around him were absent-minded as usual. They winked at each other, secretly wondering why Teacher Yuan was so easy to talk to today. Could it be that the sky was going to rain red and the sun was going to rise in the west? Had the evil teacher changed? Just as the little monkeys were wriggling around and having fun, the broken door was slammed loudly. The dust on the broken wall fell, and there was the sound of swords being unsheathed. The little monkeys jumped in fright and huddled together. I still haven't finished. On the stone bench, Enchanting threw the unfinished book in his hand to the ground. Little brats, you can leave now. You don't have to come again. From today onwards, this academy will be closed. Go back and tell your parents to find another one. It's best to find a teacher who is more reliable than me. The road to Jianghu is long, so I will take my leave now. He stood up with a lazy smile and opened the door. Hui Mo stood outside the door with his hand on his sword. He raised his head and said coldly, "Teacher Yuan, please." In the mausoleum of the previous emperor, Ning Shu looked at the vegetable farmer kneeling in front of her. Her eyes were sharp, and she didn't say a word. This person's surname was Li Yu, and he was a famous vegetable merchant in the capital. The imperial household department was responsible for the usage of the guards and eunuchs in the imperial mausoleum. Every 15 days, the only food was vegetables, and they couldn't store them. Therefore, Li Yu was specially selected from the famous vegetable merchants in the city. After registering with the Ministry of Revenue, he would send fresh fruits to the imperial mausoleum every evening to ensure the daily consumption of the imperial mausoleum. Ning Shu spent half a day and searched every corner of the imperial mausoleum. She asked all the guards and eunuchs. No one would have thought that in the end, she would find a flaw in this little Li Yu. Chapter 594. You're called Li Yu? Ha, how can such a name be worthy of you? In this king's opinion, you should be called Li Tiandan. How dare you? Xiao Yuni narrowed his eyes and stared coldly at this useless piece of mud by his feet. Faced with the thunderous anger, Li Yu finally stopped being stupid and slapped his own face again and again, leaving purple marks on his face as he wailed, "I beg your highness to forgive me, I beg your highness to forgive me, I beg your highness to forgive me. This commoner knows that I was wrong. It was this commoner who was stupid and was blinded by lard to do such a stupid thing. This commoner left a chance for the thief to take advantage of and create such a big disaster, but this commoner really didn't do it on purpose. This commoner was sick with leprosy and couldn't go out to deliver the goods, so I asked someone else to do it. Who knew, this commoner really didn't do it on purpose. It was that bastard Liu Laosan who harmed me. He is the main culprit. Your Highness, quickly go catch him." In this situation, this person was still full of excuses. Ning Shu frowned in disgust. People who have leprosy, if it's mild, will have patches on their skin or skin lesions like papules. If it's serious, the skin will be uneven, accompanied by hair loss, thick lips, a lion-like face, and even deformed limbs. If you really had such a serious disease, how could there be no traces on the back of your hands and neck? You're clearly lying. Li Yu was about to quibble when he was interrupted by Ning Shu. She really didn't have time to listen to his nonsense. Also, if you really were sick and couldn't serve the imperial family, according to the rules of the Ministry of Revenue, you should immediately report to the Ministry of Revenue and change the vegetable vendor, instead of deceiving your superiors and subordinates. You specifically told Liu Laosan to dress up as you, and even lowered your voice when you spoke, saying your usual catchphrase. If I hadn't accidentally heard that Liu Laosan was wearing a bamboo hat when he delivered the food in the evening when it was dark, I would have been fooled by you. I don't think you're stupid. It's clear that your conscience fell into your eyes for money. We don't have time to beat around the bush with you. If you don't tell us the truth, today your head will be left here to be buried with the late emperor. Ning Shu's words hit the ground, making Li Yu's soul almost leave his body. He cried out, I'll tell you, I'll tell you. This commoner has confessed everything. It turned out that after Li Yu was elected as an imperial merchant 5 years ago, his status as a vegetable merchant in the capital had soared to the sky. When the people heard of his reputation, they all rushed to order food from him. Over time, he naturally became too busy, and the 7 or 8 workers under him were not enough. Hiring new workers would naturally be a waste of money, but he couldn't bear to not earn that large sum of money. Thus, one night, he came up with a plan. It would be better to secretly assign the work at hand to other small vegetable farmers. Every day, they would deliver melons and vegetables for him. This way, he wouldn't have to spend a single tael of silver, and he wouldn't have to waste any effort. Every day, he could just sit at home and drink tea while waiting for them to deliver large sums of money. Beautiful, beautiful. Liu Laosan was one of the vegetable farmers who worked with him. He was in charge of the mausoleum and the other 2 restaurants. After confessing his good deeds, Xiao Yuni wasn't willing to let this kind of trash dirty his eyes. He ordered for them to be sent to prison, and sent people to arrest Liu Laosan and his wife. Ning Shu didn't think that those 2 scumbags, Ling Er's adoptive parents in name, would actually have such a large connection with the imperial mausoleum. It was really beyond her imagination. Xiao Yuni said, from the looks of it, it's very likely that Liu Laosan took the opportunity to sneak into the imperial mausoleum the night before to do something to the stone tablet. The next day, after the heavy rain, the bricks collapsed, exposing the stone tablet. But how did he do it with the blood lotus inscription and the broken finger? Could it be that he also did something else? Chapter 595. Ning Shu furrowed her eyebrows. But the time he took to deliver the food was very short, and it would be faster for him to do something on the ground. The blood lotus note and broken finger both fell from the sky. Did he climb up a tree and place the mechanism there? Then what are the conditions for the mechanism to be triggered? How can he guarantee that it would be triggered at the right time and no one would notice? Xiao Yuni also thought along this line of thought. Could it be something like a crossbow? Then even if he was outside the mausoleum, he would be able to shoot it here. Ning Shu shook her head slowly. It can't be done. Even the nearest wall is 3 to 4 miles away from here, far out of the range of the crossbow. And if the crossbowman wants to aim at the target in such a precise range, he must be standing on high ground. Look around the imperial mausoleum, it's flat ground. There's no chance for the crossbowman to move at all. This possibility was completely ruled out. Xiao Yuni fell into deep thought and stopped talking. Ning Shu bit her petal-like lips and stood on the spot silently. She looked up and observed every corner of the mausoleum seriously, trying to find more effective clues from here. The warm light above her head shone on her porcelain-like face. It was transparent and beautiful, but also unusually sharp. Xiao Yuni stood beside her, looking at her side profile almost greedily. He couldn't help but remember when she was young. When she first learned from teacher Hui Ci and came into contact with detective cases, they often wouldn't see each other for half a month. But as long as they met, she would be like a chatterbox, sharing with him the novel things she encountered in detective cases. Even if he couldn't understand her new ideas, she would never get tired of it. Unlike now, it seemed like they hadn't talked for a long time. Even if they were standing side by side at this moment, they were so far apart that it felt like there was a river without a bridge between them. Not knowing what Xiao Yuni was thinking, Ning Shu repeatedly measured the area with her feet without any distractions. The testimonies of the guards and eunuchs just now rolled in her mind like a water curtain. Every step of the crime followed her train of thought and deduced step by step, simulating one world after another and overturning it again and again. There was already a buzzing sound in her head, announcing that she was about to reach her body's limit. But she still forced herself to hold on and kept telling herself, "Don't be weak, you don't have the right to rest, work harder, work harder." There was no time. However, the alarm bell in her heart still rang heavily in her mind, dang, dang, reminding her not to push herself too hard. Ning Shu suddenly stopped and looked in the direction of the bell tower 500 steps away from the imperial mausoleum. I think I know how he did it. She endured the buzzing pain in her head and found the little guard who had just spoken to her. You said that when the blood lotus letter floated down, you happened to hear the bell of the clock tower. Which tower is it? The young imperial bodyguard said, that's right. Because the late emperor believed in the Taoist yin-yang 8 trigrams technique, he specially built 12 bell towers around the imperial mausoleum. This place is located in the northwest of the imperial mausoleum, which is the Qian position on the 8 trigrams diagram. Therefore, the bell tower at the back will ring 3 times every morning to inform the late emperor's spirit in heaven. Xiao Yuni was puzzled. Shouldn't it be rung every day at Shu or Hai? Why is it in the morning? It's precisely because of the Qian position that yin and yang complement each other. Naturally, he had to choose the time of the 8 trigrams. This was a rule set by the late emperor himself when he was still alive. Ning Shu immediately said, in other words, the bell tower only rings once a day at 7 in the morning? The young imperial bodyguard said, that's right. Ning Shu's eyes lit up and she immediately ran towards the bell tower. I guessed right, it's really it. This is the trap set up by Liu Larosan. Chapter 596. We've always been puzzled as to how Liu Larosan managed to set up the imperial tomb. Especially after the stone tablet appeared, His Majesty sent people to surround the imperial mausoleum. No matter how capable he was, there was no way he could get close enough to do anything. The only time he could sneak into the imperial mausoleum was when he delivered food in the evening. So, how did he do it in broad daylight in front of everyone? I finally figured it out now. In fact, he had already chosen the best helper, which was this clock tower. Because of her excitement, Ning Shu's forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. The tiredness in her eyes was swept away and there was a dazzling light in her eyes. It was so bright that people couldn't look at her directly, but they couldn't help being attracted to her. There were more than 100 steps in the clock tower and it was 8 feet tall. Ning Shu held the corner of her clothes and spun around until she reached the highest point. Following the thick and heavy bronze clock in front of her, Ning Shu looked up at the dome and found the mechanism. It's really like this. It's that small crossbow. Do you see the iron wire tied to the top of the clock? The other end of the bell was fixed to the full string of the crossbow. Every time the bell was struck by someone, it would affect the iron wire. When the iron wire left its position, the object on the string would leave the string and fly towards the target that had been designed long ago. The second finger was cut off in this way. As for the blood lotus script, although it was only a piece of silk, it only needed to wrap a small stone in it. After it left the string, the small stone would fall first and the silk would be blown up by the wind and slowly float to the ground, attracting everyone's attention. What Liu Larosan had to do was to come here the night before each attack and quickly set up the mechanism. When the time came the next day, everything would be done naturally. Even the person in charge of ringing the clock wouldn't know that he had helped the murderer so much. Xiao Yuni also felt that the clouds in front of him had dispersed. I see. This Liu Larosan is really scheming. I'll report to Mother now and tell her about this big progress. Ning Shu widened her eyes. But those children haven't been found yet. Liu Larosan hasn't confessed and teacher Yuan hasn't told him his motive from 10 years ago. Shouldn't you be patient and wait for all the details to come to light before reporting to the Empress? Xiao Yuni smiled faintly. Of course we have to continue looking for them, but the case is definitely done by these 2 bastards. He took a step forward and gently placed his large and rough palm on the back of her hand. He gazed at her gently. Shu, you've worked hard. I will definitely tell Imperial Mother about your hard work in solving this case. I will also do my best to beg Imperial Mother to release your mother from prison as soon as possible. With me around, don't worry. Ning Shu subconsciously pulled her hand back, but he held it so tightly that she couldn't move it at all. She looked up and met with Xiao Yuni's dark and slightly red eyes. Standing on this 80 feet tall bell tower, there were more than 100 stairs that looked like a whirlpool of fate. He was like a red-eyed lion as he approached her step by step. She reminded him in a low voice, "Your Highness, there's another important case." Xiao Yuni ignored her and continued to approach her until her back hit the wooden pillar behind her. Ning Shu frowned. She couldn't get rid of his grip and couldn't avoid his hot breath that was approaching her inch by inch. "Your Highness, don't forget that your fiancé just met with misfortune a few days ago." Xiao Yuni lowered his head and smiled devilishly. He used his eyes to trace the shape of her lips carefully. "You said it yourself, she's just my fiancé and not a proper in-law. What do I have to worry about?" Ning Shu was afraid of breaking the vases. Her hands trembled violently and she tried to turn her head away to avoid his poisonous lips. "Then you don't need to care about Great Elder Princess. Are you sure that you don't need her help anymore?" Xiao Yuni leaned against her neck almost greedily and breathed in her breath. "I don't deny that I really needed her half a month ago. So even if I didn't like her daughter, even if I always had you in my heart, when Imperial Father granted me the marriage, I still forced myself to smile and agree to the marriage. But now, I have a simpler way. I don't need to rely on anyone. I only need to rely on myself. Xiaoho Qing doesn't want you anymore, does he? I saw it that night. Now he avoids you and doesn't even want to look at you. Then, why are you still so obsessed with him? Let's go back to the past, okay? As long as we have the past." Chapter 597. The scorching sun was like fire, as if it wanted to dry every drop of water in her body. Her injuries had yet to heal and she had not slept for the entire night. She had only been holding on with one breath the entire time and was already at the end of her rope. Her vision turned black. She bit the tip of her tongue hard, letting the strong smell of blood from her wound help her stay awake. "Your Highness, I don't know what you mean by what you said, and I don't understand what you mean by in the past. I only wanted to save my mother, so whether it's Mr. Xiaoho, or Your Highness, I don't have the time or energy to care about them. Your Highness, please be magnanimous and let me." Before she could finish, Xiao Yuni pressed her hands above her head. "What if I don't?" His hot breath stuck to her cheeks, his gaze seeming to want to swallow her whole. "Do you think I'm still the same as before, easily bewitched by your endless excuses? You're right about something. You're not who you were in the past, and I'm not who I was in the past either. Today, the scenery on this clock tower is very good. I want you to remember one thing, you're mine." Ning Shu gritted her teeth, purposely biting her lips until they were full of blood. "Your Highness, I'm a human, I'm definitely not someone's possession. I'm begging you for the last time, let me down. Don't make me hate you." She thought that seeing those dampening blood and wounds would make Xiao Yuni return in disappointment, but she did not expect that it would arouse the evil in him instead. He grabbed her wrists with one hand and wiped away the blood on her lips with the other. "Even if you hate me and hate me, it's okay. I don't care. I just want you to be by my side every day and every moment like when we were young. If you don't have a heart, then you can be a human too. As long as it's you." Humility and cruelty contradicted each other and he turned his head, aiming for her soft lips. Ning Shu's eyes were tightly shut as transparent droplets of tears fell from the corners of her eyes. Just as her lips were about to be snatched by him, a golden bead flew through the air, aiming at his eyes. Xiao Yuni immediately turned his head to avoid that golden bead, and then a dozen thin golden leaves reflecting a glaring light flew over, forcing Xiao Yuni to let go of Ning Shu and retreat in a panic. Ning Shu slid down to sit on the floor. The tight thread in her brain snapped with a buzzing sound and was completely swallowed by the darkness. Xiao Yuni took more than 10 steps back before he managed to avoid the hidden weapons. Behind his ears, the golden leaves flew into the wooden pillar behind him, disappearing without a trace. Only the bronze bell was still humming faintly from the aftershock. Xiao Yuni narrowed his eyes and looked down the bell tower. He saw a figure standing quickly and steadily on the whirlpool-like steps. He lifted the corner of his sky-blue robe and walked up the steps step by step. A black silk cloth fluttered behind him and his steps were unexpectedly light. Surprise flashed in Xiao Yunyi's eyes. In a short time, he had adjusted his loss of control and gaffe just now and buried it in his heart. A cold smile appeared on his lips. I just heard the bad news that the prince's mansion was attacked by thieves one after another this morning and was very worried. I was thinking of going to the prince's mansion to visit the prince personally after this case was over, but I didn't expect to meet you here. It's really fate. However, seeing that the prince is still handsome and his expression is normal, I'm sure the thieves did not hurt the prince at all last night. Yunyi's heart is at ease. Chapter 598. With Ju Sai's help, Xiao Qing climbed to the top of the clock tower step by step and stopped in front of Xiao Yunyi. When he saw the wound on the side of his neck, Xiao Yunyi was stunned and asked worriedly, "What happened to the side of your neck? Are you injured? Is it serious? Do you need me to call an imperial physician to treat your injury?" "Thank you for your concern, Your Highness. My life is quite smooth and I won't die anytime soon." Xiao Qing was not in the mood to pretend to be polite with him. He walked to Ning Shu's side, bent down and held her in his arms. Xiao Yunyi's eyes were dark as he blocked his way and said with a faint smile, "Prince Xiao, you're injured and it might be difficult for you to hold Shu Er. Let me do it." Xiao Qing's hands were as gentle as he held Ning Shu, but his expression was as cold as when he faced Xiao Yunyang. "If I let you do it, would I give you another chance to hurt her?" Xiao Yunyang's face sank as his facade was torn apart. He sneered, "That's right, I admit that my actions just now really scared her. But what I did was just because I couldn't control my feelings after suppressing them for a long time. But wasn't it you who really made her sad? I saw it that night. You left her alone outside the cold palace gate and cried so sadly. That was something that had never happened when we were together before. Xiao Qing, what right do you have to criticize me?" Xiao Qing's fingertips trembled, and a deep pain flashed past his jade-white face. However, he was unable to open his mouth to provide an unnecessary explanation for himself. He held Ning Shu tightly in his arms and said with an unprecedented fierceness in his voice, "Get out of the way." Xiao Yunyi pressed his hand on his sword, his murderous intent showing. "What if I don't do it today?" Ju Sai was the first to unsheath his sword. Following his signal, the guards of the Duke's mansion quickly appeared and surrounded Xiao Yunyi's entourage. Then, "Your Highness, please take a look around and see how powerful our Duke of Nanping is." The veins on Xiao Yunyi's arms bulged. Under the vast sky, he wore golden armor and a scarlet-red cloak as he stood opposite Xiao Qing's azure gauze gown. One was dense like blood, the other was cold like ice, and they silently overflowed with killing intent. Until Xiao Yunyi's personal attendant dared to persuade him in a low voice. "The Empress is still waiting for you in the central palace. Your Highness, let's go back first. There's no rush." Xiao Yunyi closed his eyes harshly and the attendant almost thought that he was going to kill him. However, he saw his hand on the sword slowly loosen, and when he opened his eyes again, he was calm and composed. "Mr. Xiao, I have something important to do, so I won't be catching up with you. I'll definitely have a chance to drink and chat with you another day. I heard that you're proficient in chess." Coincidentally, my chess skills have also been praised by the Grand Tutors. When the time comes, I'll definitely have a good competition with you and see who wins and who loses. The heavy armor stepped down the wooden ladder step by step. As his dazzling cloak disappeared without a trace, the clock tower finally regained its peace. Xiao Qing lowered his head and quietly listened to Ning Shu's rapid breathing in his arms, as if she was still deep in some kind of fear in her dreams. Xiao Qing's heart ached so much that he took a deep breath and followed her breathing. He gently pressed his forehead against hers, each word piercing her heart. "I'm sorry to let you fight alone. It's been hard on you. I'm sorry I wasn't by your side and couldn't help you. I'm sorry I made you sad. Perhaps I shouldn't have come to the capital in this life. If you didn't meet me, You wouldn't be sad. Chapter 599. Below the clock tower, in the pavilion. Rubbing her dizzy head, Ning-Shu opened her eyes with difficulty. She opened her mouth but couldn't make a sound for a long time. Only when the warm tea was brought to her lips and she swallowed mouthful by mouthful, did she gradually regain consciousness. Forsythia, Zigue? Why are you here? Ning-Shu called out with a hoarse voice. Seeing that she had woken up, Forsythia put the empty cup to the side in surprise. But when she looked carefully at her appearance, tears almost fell. Miss, why didn't you keep your word? Yesterday morning, we had a good talk. This servant prepared a table of delicious food for you to eat at the food tonight. In the end, we didn't see you the entire night. This servant was very worried and pulled Zigue to the Supreme Court to ask. The Supreme Court said that you went to the docks, so we ran to the docks. The people at the docks said that there was a fire just now and a handsome official was seriously injured. We heard the description and thought it was you, so we quickly ran to the medical hall. Only then did we know that it was official Tan. The two of us ran all over the capital before we met that little brother called Tian Wen. After asking him, we rushed here to find you. Miss, how are you? Your complexion is so bad, and there are dark circles under your eyes. This servant doesn't want to scold you, but you don't cherish yourself too much. If the Junju knew you were like this in prison, I don't know how distressed she would be. Do you think you are made of iron? Ning-Shu smiled and wiped away the golden beads on her face. She comforted, aren't I, your miss, fine? It's just that I was too anxious to investigate the case and didn't sleep the entire night. Coupled with the heat, I fell asleep for a while. Now that I've slept, I'm much better. Don't worry, although your miss is not made of iron, there is a good saying, a scourge lives for 1,000 years. I haven't done enough scourge in this world, I haven't eaten enough good food, and my little beauty Forsythia hasn't been doted on enough. Forsythia was amused and angry by her. Miss, keep talking nonsense, I'm not talking to you anymore. Ning-Shu pinched the tip of her nose and smiled as she turned to look at Zigui, who was silently wiping away the sweat on her forehead with a handkerchief. She said softly, don't worry, my good Zigui. I'm fine. Zigui's nose turned sour. He took her hand and wrote seriously on her palm, Miss, I will never leave you again. Ning-Shu smiled and held her hand tightly in his palm, infinitely warm. Okay, I won't leave you again. She suddenly thought of something and asked, by the way, did you meet anyone else on your way here? Zigui could not answer and pulled Forsythia anxiously. Forsythia said foolishly, of course, there are many guards on duty here. We didn't have a token when we came in, so we were almost stopped by the guards outside. Chapter 600. So it's like that. Ning-Shu sighed softly, her voice full of disappointment. Forsythia asked, Miss, what's wrong? Are you looking for someone important? Perhaps we missed it when we came. How about this servant go and ask the guards one by one for Miss? This servant will go right away. Forsythia was very mobile. She lifted the corner of her dress and ran outside. Ning-Shu hurriedly pulled her back and said awkwardly, there's no one important. It's just that your miss is dreaming about being infatuated. All right, I've rested enough. Serve your miss and get me up. We've finished investigating the problems here. Let's go to the next stop. Before that, let's find a restaurant to eat to my heart's content and properly worship my 5 Viscera temple. Forsythia didn't suspect her and said with a smile, all right. This servant remembers that there's a restaurant 3 li east of the Imperial Mausoleum that you like to eat. The proprietress's steamed fish is the best. Let's go now. Ning-Shu smiled and nodded. Forsythia and Zigui treated her like a treasure and supported her to the door. After stepping out of the Imperial Mausoleum, she hesitated for a while before turning back to ask the guards. She learned that there were only 2 groups of people who came to the Imperial Mausoleum today. The sixth prince had something to do and left in a hurry. Forsythia and Zigui arrived one after the other. There was no one else. Ningxu finally gave up. She said, "Sorry for the disturbance." She lifted the corner of her dress and boarded the carriage. Her long eyelashes covered the bamboo curtain, hiding the dense loneliness in her eyes. It wasn't until Zigui waved his horsewhip and the Ning family carriage completely disappeared at the end of the road that a figure silently appeared at the door. "You all did well. If Miss Ning comes back to ask again, you must say that my Shizzy has never been here. Thank you on behalf of my Shizzy." After tipping the guards of the Imperial Mausoleum one by one, Ju Sai silently disappeared again. Zigui drove the carriage smoothly on the street. Forsythia leaned against the window and sighed. "Ari, in the past, this street was very lively, especially on the 7th day of the 7th month. All the girls in the city came out to shop and buy beautiful cloth, new styles of jewelry, and new fragrances and rouges. They put up all the good food and fun things for sale. There were so many people on the street that not even a drop of water could trickle through. Just because of the recent cases, everyone is scared out of their wits. Even the peddlers can't be seen. I'm afraid this year's begging festival won't be lively." Ningxu held her chin in her hands. "Is it that my little Forsythia is worried that the festival won't be lively and will prevent you from meeting a good husband?" Lian Qiao blushed. "Miss, why are you making fun of me? This servant doesn't want a good husband. This servant just wants to accompany young Miss to celebrate the begging festival happily. After all, this is the last begging festival before your 17th birthday." As she spoke, Forsythia couldn't help but feel lonely. Although they purposely didn't mention it, as if as long as they didn't mention it, they could pretend that nothing had happened. However, everyone knew in their hearts that what was to come would come. There was only a month left until Ningxu's 17th birthday. Ningxu pinched her chubby cheeks and said, "Don't worry, my good Lianqiao. This 7th day of the 7th month is indeed the last Chiqiao festival before I turn 17, but I promise, it definitely won't be the last one in my life. Unless, you don't trust your miss at all." "Of course I trust her. Who is my miss?" She studied under the female Zhuge Liang. "She solves cases like a god. Her intelligence is better than Ban Jieyu, and her beauty is better than Diaochan." Forsythia was halfway through her flattery when the carriage suddenly shook violently. Forsythia was thrown to the other side of the carriage and collided with Ningxu. She was shocked and shouted, "Ah, Zigui! What's going on?" Outside the carriage, Zigui tightly held onto the reins in her hands to control the horse and avoid a violent collision from the front. She opened her mouth to remind Ningxu and the others to hold on to the door and not be thrown off, but her empty mouth could only make a short "ah" sound, which represented her inner anxiety. Forsythia clung to the wall of the carriage and looked out. A horse that seemed to have lost its mind was pulling a cart towards them. Zigui tried her best to avoid it, but another cart followed closely behind. "Miss, be careful." Chapter 601. Seeing that the two horses were about to crash into each other, Ningxu and Forsythia clung to the wall of the carriage. The crazy horse in front suddenly neighed in pain, and its huge body fell to the ground without warning. Together with the handcart behind it, it made a deafening roar. When the horse carriage finally stabilized, Lian Qiao covered her heart that was almost scared silly and hurriedly jumped down from the horse carriage. After taking a closer look, she put her palms together and prayed to the heavens, "Oh my God, this is too scary." Luckily there was a rope that tripped the horse's hooves. Otherwise, the consequences today would be unimaginable. Amitabha, the heavens really have eyes. Ningxu thought for a moment and said, "Rope? Where did the rope come from?" Forsythia looked around for a long time. "I don't know. Maybe someone accidentally dropped it here and tripped the horse's hooves, indirectly saving our lives." She hugged her mistress's arm in fear and said, "Mistress, a few days ago, Princess Helui was hit by an ox cart and died suddenly. Today, we met a crazy horse. I'm so scared." Ningxu was exceptionally calm and even had the mood to joke, Accidents happen every day in the capital. It's just that we happened to meet it today. Fortunately, it's scary but not dangerous. Moreover, I haven't reached my 17th birthday yet. That person has waited for so many years. How could he be willing to waste all his efforts? Don't worry, don't scare yourself. The passers-by quickly came forward to help tie up the crazy horse and waited for the magistrate to deal with it. Zigui repeatedly confirmed that Ning Shu and Forsythia were fine and got on the carriage to continue on their way. Ning Shu looked back for a long time but didn't find the person she was thinking of in the crowd. She pursed her lips and thought to herself, did I think too much again? She didn't know that after their carriage had gone far, another carriage quietly appeared at the corner. Juicy carried two masked men who had been knocked unconscious and threw them at Xiahou Qing's feet. Heir apparent, we caught these two killers nearby. The two crazy horses just now were done by them. Xiahou Qing's voice was extremely cold. Whip them 100 times. Find a chance to let them go. I want to see who dares to touch her. Yes. Juicy requested. Miss Ning has already walked 500 feet. Should we continue to follow? Let's go. The burning pain from his internal organs pierced through his entire body, causing fine beads of cold sweat to seep out of his back. He clenched his fists and silently swallowed the pain that was 10 times, 100 times worse. His slightly curved lips were infinitely gentle. I can't be at ease if she's alone. Be careful, she's as cunning as a fox. Don't let her find out. We're here, we're here. Up ahead is the Drunken Immortal Tavern. Forsythia's thoughts came and went quickly. When she saw the signboard of Drunken Immortal House, her eyes lit up. She happily helped Ning Shu out of the car. The enthusiastic waiter immediately greeted them. Come in, come in. Distinguished guests, please take a seat. Forsythia was very generous. According to Ning Shu's taste, she ordered 8 hot dishes and 4 cold dishes in one go, filling the big table. The three of them ate heartily. Ning Shu enjoyed the food while explaining the current case to them. She didn't know that just upstairs, less than 10 feet away from her, there was a person who didn't know the taste of food, but was enjoying the same food as her. It was as if he was sitting with her. After a full meal, Ning Shu put down the silver chopsticks, paid the bill, and left. The case had progressed to this point. When Hui Mo arrested Yuan Wanting and Liu Laosan and brought them to justice and interrogated them, important progress would be made. Time waits for no man. Zigui went to drive the car first. Ning Shu and Forsythia waited in the lobby. Suddenly, a waiter behind them shouted in panic. The handle is broken. Hot oil. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. Ning Shu turned around and saw the waiter holding a pot of hot oil with a broken handle stumbling towards the lobby. The hot oil was smoking. The waiter's hands were red. Once he couldn't hold on, the oil would splash and disfigure him. For a moment, the guests panicked and avoided the oil. Ning Shu pulled Forsythia and turned around to run. Unexpectedly, one of the guests stepped on Forsythia's skirt and fell down with Ning Shu. At the same time, the waiter couldn't hold the pot of hot oil anymore. He loosened his grip and splashed it towards Ning Shu. Ning Shu subconsciously lowered her head and raised her sleeve to protect Forsythia's face. Just as the pot of hot oil was about to splash over, a table suddenly flipped over, blocking in front of Ning Shu and the rest, catching the pot of hot oil. The oil splattered along the legs of the table and flowed to the ground, creating a mess. Some people were splashed a little, but fortunately, none of them were seriously injured. The table completed its task and fell to the ground with a bang. The waiter, and the guests in the lobby were still in a panic. There were 2 accidents in 2 hours. Forsythia was so scared that her legs turned to jelly and her whole body trembled. She raised her head and saw her miss smiling after a short moment of shock. Miss, why are you still in the mood to smile? Was her miss scared silly? Ning Shu pulled Lian Qiao up from the ground and tidied up her clothes. Her curved eyebrows and eyes were smiling mysteriously. Her watery eyes were like the clear sky. Of course I have to smile. It is so interesting. Chapter 602. Forsythia was completely confused. Miss, what are you talking about? Ning Shu couldn't help but laugh. Nothing, it's just that there's a guy who's so cute and awkward that I really want to pinch him, and… Halfway through her sentence, her cheeks were dyed with a layer of spring and her mind couldn't stop daydreaming. She lightly coughed a few times and patted her face, quickly changing the topic. Cough, cough, look, Zigue brought the carriage over, let's get in. Forsythia looked at the mess in the hall and was full of fear. She hurriedly got up and said, "Okay, miss, slow down a bit, I'll help you." As the master and servant walked through the threshold of the drunken immortal residence, Ning Shu raised her head to look at the sky. Using her hand as a fan, she said in a clear voice, "This day is really hot. It would be great if we could find a stall selling brown sugar ice powder. It would be best if it was mixed with sweet and refreshing fruits. That would definitely be the best way to relieve the heat. Don't you think so, Lian Xiao?" As Ning Shu's absolute support, little Forsythia nodded repeatedly. "Ah? Yes. Miss, are you saying it so loudly for this servant to hear?" Ning Shu deliberately glanced behind her and said with a smile, "Is that so? It's just a casual remark, those who want to hear it will hear it, and those who don't need to care." After Ning Shu and her servant left, on the second floor of Drunken Immortal House, Xiaoho Qing slowly walked out from behind a screen painted with a lotus pond beauty, Huanxi sand, and sighed helplessly. "She knows." Ju Sai frowned. "We've been hiding our tracks before, but this basin of oil came unexpectedly. If we didn't act, the two girls would have been burned. Miss Ning is also very attentive, she guessed it immediately. What should we do next?" Xiaoho Qing's lips overflowed with a wry smile. She deliberately said that just now for me to hear. "What can I do?" "Continue to follow." He silently clenched his fingertips. "When we can't hide anymore, we can only…" Forsythia felt that after the two accidents in a row, their luck seemed to have taken a turn and suddenly exploded. Just as the young lady said she wanted to eat brown sugar ice powder, they met at the corner after a few steps. Then the young miss muttered that although the ice powder was delicious, it was a little too sweet to eat too much at once. At this time, if there were fresh and sweet big lotus seeds to eat, they would be sweet and refreshing, which would be excellent. Sure enough, half a street later, they saw Wang selling lotus seed heads. Every single lotus seed head on the basket was dark green and eye-catching, and there were even ice-cold water droplets rolling around them. One look was enough to make people happy. Ning Shu smiled like a flower. She ordered Forsythia to buy a bunch of them. She folded her sleeves and peeled them one by one into her palm. Finally, she fed them all into Forsythia's mouth. Forsythia was so full that her stomach was round. She begged for mercy. "I can't eat anymore. Miss, I just ate and drank the ice powder. Now, there are so many lotus seeds. No matter how delicious they are, this servant can't eat anymore. Please spare this servant. Besides, why don't you eat, miss? If you can't eat, eat the last one." Ning Shu pinched the last snow-white lotus seed and stuffed it into Forsythia's mouth. Her eyes were filled with the most beautiful white peacock's long feathers flying across the sky. "Some things, you don't need to eat. Just looking at me is enough to make you happy." After peeling the lotus seed heads, Ning Shu wiped her hands and opened the bamboo curtain. "Zigui, stop at the place where the 4 treasures of the study are sold. I want to buy 2 charcoal pens. It's inconvenient to solve cases without them." Zigui nodded. After walking for 2 more streets, they arrived at the Wansu Pavilion, which was also the largest ink shop in the East City. Ning Shu thought that there wouldn't be many people. Unexpectedly, there were a lot of people. Most of them were young girls. After thinking for a while, she realized that the begging festival was coming soon. No matter if they were rich or ordinary girls, who didn't want to be in the limelight on that day? Although the city wasn't very stable, it couldn't stop the hearts of girls of the right age. They could save on buying cloth and tailoring clothes, but they couldn't save on one thing. That was, on the begging festival, everyone had to take out a lantern they made and put it on display at the begging festival. The most clever one would be judged. Even if they couldn't be the winner, they weren't afraid. As long as they liked each other that night, they didn't need to say too much. The lantern the girl handed over shyly said everything. Many girls showed their brilliance on that night and found the right man. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.